Welcome, everybody, to another live Rattlesnake TV debate between Andrew Wilson and Brandan Robertson. If you guys would like to find these gentlemen, their links are all going to be below. A few pre-show notes before we get into it. Don't forget to like the video on your way in. Shows YouTube that this is worthwhile watching. The topic of the debate today is, should the church be accepting of LGBTQ people? There is a poll in the chat right now, guys, so make sure to get to the chat, put your vote in, cast your vote. Very important that we get as many votes as possible so we get an understanding of the breadth of the audience to see where people stand on this issue. After introducing themselves, each debater will get to make an opening statement of up to 7 minutes. We will then get to read out some super chats after the opening statements before getting into open dialogue for around 90 minutes or so, more if we need. At the end, if we have sufficient interest, we will take some callers and you guys can have your chance to ask whatever questions you would like to the debaters. If you would like to call in, message me on Twitter, guys, Jake Rattle SNK. That's Jake Rattle SNK. We'll put that in the chat so you guys have that link. And if you're a real person and if you're not naked when you get onto the stream or something, then you can, by all means, ask a question. As the moderator, I'll only intervene if the debaters are talking over each other too much, or if we need to get back on topic, or if we need clarification on something. At any point, the debaters can appeal to the moderator. Super chats will be put on screen as they come in, unless, of course, they are unbecoming of this civilized debate. $10 and above will be read out after the opening statements, and also at the end for the two gents to respond to. We could increase that price depending on the volume of the super chats. Guys, I am not monetizing this debate whilst it is live for your convenience, because we don't want the ads popping up and you guys being all behind. But that costs me, so in order to keep that going, I will need my palms greased. So please, guys, get your super chats in and contribute to the grift. And finally, you'll see in the chat that there is a poll up with the prompt. As we said before, get your votes in now, and then at the end, we are going to do the poll again. The idea of the debate is for these gentlemen to put the most convincing argument forward possible, and to see how many people they can bring over to their side. We want to be changing minds. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let the games begin.
And now, for the thousands in attendance, let's get ready to rumble!
All right, guys, we are here with our debaters. We are going to take some opening statements after these gentlemen both introduce themselves, tell you guys where you can find them, and also a little bit about themselves. Starting with you, Brandan.
Well, hey, yeah, thank you so much, Jake, for having me, and Andrew, so good to meet you finally after watching so many videos. My name is Brandan Robertson. I'm a pastor and a queer theologian, and you can find all my stuff at queerchristian.org. But for me, today's debate couldn't be easier for anyone who's familiar with...
Just quickly, Brandan, we just want a quick introduction. So I'm going to get Andrew to introduce himself, and then we'll go into opening statements.
Sorry about that. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's my intro, Brandan. So my name is Andrew Wilson. I am the host of the Crucible, popular entertainment channel on YouTube. I'm a political analyst, a political satirist, and also I engage in debates all over the world with various people, mostly on politics, not usually Christian apologetics, but occasionally I like to take those on too.
Lovely. All right, Brandan, you have got 7 minutes on the clock, my friend. Let's get into it.
Thank you. Yeah. So as I was saying, today's debate for me couldn't be any easier than, as somebody who's familiar with scripture, morality, and basic human understanding of sexuality and gender. The question of whether queer people belong in the church, to me, seems trivial. It's already answered. LGBT people are already a part of the Church of Christ and have always been. And to begin with, I think it's important to frame this discussion properly. This isn't just about interpreting a few Bible verses. It's actually at the heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think Andrew probably would agree. The gospel, at its heart, from my perspective, is a message of love, liberation, and ultimately salvation through God's inclusive love. Jesus welcomed those on the margins, those who were excluded by religious authorities. He never asked people about their specific standards of worthiness. Instead, he simply invited people to come and follow him and be transformed. So the question of why we're still debating LGBT people belonging in the church is interesting to me. And let me make this clear. What makes this debate challenging isn't the facts or the theology. It's that Andrew and I are beginning from two fundamentally different places. I am a Protestant who rejects the authority of the Catholic Church and the supposed infallibility of any human being, past or present, including myself. I also don't accept evangelical Protestant frameworks of inerrancy for the Bible because I think it's simply not true. What I do believe is that Scripture is inspired, authoritative for our faith, when it's paired with reason, science, tradition, psychology, and experience. And that's where my theology comes alive as a theologian and a scholar. I can confidently say that there's not a single verse in Scripture that condemns loving, same-sex, consensual relationships. There's not a single place that the Bible mandates a male-female binary for romantic relationships. And even if it did, the question would be, why? Because there's zero moral harm caused by consensual adult same-sex relationships or by people expressing their authentic gender identities. The moral logic is clear, the psychological data is clear, and history shows us that Christians have revised their positions on topics like this, including slavery, divorce, and a plethora of other issues over the centuries. Some may argue that the church needs to hold to traditional values, but let's think about what tradition means. If tradition meant preserving outdated practices, the church would still condone slavery. It would still refuse to marry divorced individuals. It would still stand against interracial marriage. Thankfully, the church has always had the capacity to evolve. I believe we've listened to the Spirit of God and science and culture and the lived experiences of people. And so revising tradition, in my opinion, is actually fulfilling it. And let's not forget that a majority of mainline Protestant denominations in the country today are already inclusive of LGBT people. Even Pope Francis himself has moved towards welcoming and blessing LGBT individuals and our love. And as an openly gay pastor who has served in 3 Protestant denominations, I can tell you that being gay has not had an impact on my ability to minister in my faith in Christ. In fact, it strengthens my connection to the gospel, a gospel that has always been, in my opinion, about love, justice, and inclusion. I think the real issue we're debating is fear. Fear that LGBT inclusion threatens the nuclear family, despite zero evidence for such a claim. Fear that queer Christians will undermine faith, even though we reflect the same diversity and devotion as straight believers. Fear that somehow by embracing LGBT individuals, we will dilute the gospel. I think this message of fear is antithetical to the gospel, and fear doesn't get the last word. Scripture declares that God's love casts out all fear. God's love is not a gatekeeper, measuring or doling out blessings based on whether we fit some narrow mold. It's an abundant, unmeasurable, and unconditional love. And LGBT people don't need to earn their place in the church. We've already are and always have been part of God's family. So my final plea is simply this. It's time for the church to catch up. The Spirit of God is moving, and the question of LGBT inclusion is not a question at all. It's a call to action, a call to embrace, affirm, and celebrate the beauty of God's diversity revealed in humanity. And so with that, I'm excited to hear from you, Andrew.
All right, Andrew, it is your time. You got 7 minutes on the clock, but guys, just after this, after Andrew's opening statements, we will be reading out some super chats. So Andrew, floor is yours.
Mr. Robertson is an object lesson and a thing I talk about often. The cult which exists in Christianity, I call the cult of be nice. I refer to these people in other ways as well. Sewing Circle Christians is the most notable way in which I set them apart. A Sewing Circle Christian, reduced, is simply a person that believes Christian ethics boils down to one main tenet: be nice, based around the culturally relative societal taboos which exist instead of actually following Christian ethics. Mr. Robertson is a product of the Sewing Circle Christians, all of whom go out of their way to be nice to him, which creates a vampiric relationship or a parasitical relationship between both. The Sewing Circle Christians get to flout their virtue and talk about how they show tons of love and grace to Mr. Robertson, of which they are actually showing neither. And Mr. Robertson, in turn, gets to use this virtue signaling as a weapon by saying, due to the niceness you show me, I can weaponize your own faith against you. They're both products of each other, which is ironic and sad. Mr. Robertson is, simply put, a subversive. He's here with a specific mission, which is to subvert Christianity, and he takes great joy in doing so. You can see him smiling even right now. His entire history is that of a subversive, log cabin Republican, subversive element in the Republican Party. Don Lemon, unless I get this wrong and you can correct me right now, wrote a foreword in your book. Is that not correct?
An endorsement, but not a
Oh,
foreword.
yeah, I'm so sorry. An endorsement saying, quote, Brandan Robertson is a fearless and one of the clearest voices for faith and LGBT inclusion. Don Lemon, by the way, who hates Christians like you can't imagine, absolutely loathes them and bashes them every chance he gets. He's an anti-Trumper, Mr. Robertson is, who uses his non-existent faith on behalf of a progressive secularist agenda to advance that secular agenda. And part of that agenda is homosexuality in church. Now, Mr. Robertson, hilariously enough, has a worldview riddled with contradictions. He says he's afraid to come out, but was lobbying for gay Republicans. He says homosexuality is innate and immutable, but claims ancient people had no understanding of sexuality and that sexuality is a 19th century construct. Total contradiction. He believes God can lie, but also claims he received divine revelation from him and knows it's true. He says sin is harm to yourself and others or God's design. By whose standards do we appeal for harm in his system? It can't be the Bible, as Mr. Robertson says. It is unnecessary to use that as a standard for morality. The list is actually endless of contradictions, which make no sense at all. The reason Mr. Robertson essentially is taken seriously at all by at least some people, mostly women, is because of the flowery language he uses. Love is love. Love between adults shouldn't be restricted, man. Jesus Christ was all about the love, bro. These are masking terms, which Christians in their foolishness of following the cult of be nice actually let him get away with because they don't want the flack of using what they consider to be vulgar language. It's actually pretty hilarious. Here's what we're actually talking about in plain English so nobody can run from it. Mr. Robertson believes that marriage between men and the consummation thereof is pleasing to God. Consummation to him means a man sticks his penis into the anus of another man and ejaculates into it. This, he thinks, is pleasing to God. Further, that pornography is not objectionable, but that it is also pleasing to God when many men put their penis into other men's anuses and ejaculate. That's what we're actually talking about here. Don't look away. That's what we're actually talking about. Not love between two men in the church, but the acceptance it's pleasing to God to stick your penis into feces. That's what we're talking about. From his view, Jesus rejoices at this. That's what he's actually saying. And that multiple men doing this with each other is what Christ would want. Jesus died on the cross so that men could have orgies. You may think this sounds absurd, because it does, but it's his actual view. And no, I'm not sugarcoating it. I'll demonstrate it shortly, in fact, when we get into the cross-examination. Now, Mr. Robertson also has a problem with morality. Mr. Robertson has to date never actually established his moral standard except from consensus and intuition. Of course, the glaring contradiction there is that if it's the vast majority of Christian intuition and consensus that LGBTQ churches are a reflection of the will of Satan, he can't object. I intend to fully put Mr. Robertson to the question on his beliefs today. And a few things just to respond to in my opening. He says, do queer people belong in church? They always have been. Yeah, to repent. They're there to repent, and they're there to be treated for the spiritual sickness which afflicts them, called homosexuality. The heart of the gospel is love, liberation, salvation. It has nothing to do with liberation. That's a new doctrine. This came around during Enlightenment principles, as well he knows. He says that it should be inspired by authority, psychology, and science. Psychology, sir, is not scientific. All right, it's not. That is not science. It's not even a soft science. It's the study of the mind. There's no scientific methodology really utilized in psychology at all, except perhaps for data gathering purposes. He says there's no place for a male-female binary. Well, Paul would disagree. He says there's zero moral harm, but we haven't established a harm principle. He says the tradition means condoning slavery under Christian ethics when it was indeed Christians themselves who were the primary abolitionists of slavery.
Amen.
Openly gay pastors, he says, can serve as ministers. Why? Because he wants to serve as a minister. So with that, I'm actually happy to just kind of yield the rest of my time and dive right into this debate.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to quickly read out a few super chats. For the ones that I'm not reading out, we have to keep them TOS, guys, but I do appreciate the support. Ryan Slater gifted 5 Rattlesnake TV memberships. The Ghost of Pinochet said, queer pastor, more Protestant heresy, LMAO. Also, hello from the Crucible crew. I'm sure, Brandon, you'll get into that during the debate. Nick Brown for $10 said, daddy chill. Ghost of Pinochet for $10 says, yes, the time-honored tradition of man-on-man buggery. Yes, we should totally replace the centering of the nuclear family and its formation for this instead. Brandon, do you have a response to that quickly?
I think it's not an either or in my perspective. So no, we're not replacing one for the other.
Yep. Ryan Slater for $10 says, thanks for not monetizing this, Jake. Super chat for the support, brother. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. We want to have this show as free-flowing as possible. Holly for $5 says, gay ad blocker. I missed that one. Made by Jim Bob for $10. Brandon, what's the meaningful difference between brotherly love and homosexuality? If you want to give a quick answer to that one.
Yeah, I just think they're two different types of love. I think the Bible talks about a variety of different kinds of love, but we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, cool. All right, fellas. Well, I mean, are you guys comfortable just doing open dialogue, or would you like to do a? Yep, okay. Open dialogue.
Let's do open dialogue. Can we clarify a few terms before we dive into the debate? Just kind of get a few things clarified. I was going through, you have a multitude of videos, and I kind of went over the positions, and I just want to make sure that this is correct. Essentially, you believe that people should strive to act with compassion, empathy towards everybody and kind of all creatures which exist, right?
Yes.
Okay. That there is a struggle, an ongoing struggle for justice, and that that needs to prevail. Right, including if it needs to prevail over the law, which Jesus Christ himself did, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One's body is their own, and it's not subject to somebody else, right? And their will.
I would talk about God having some authority and ownership of that too, but yes.
Okay. Freedoms for people should be respected, and you should not in any way unjustly encroach upon other people's freedoms.
Sure.
Okay. Belief should conform to one's best scientific and psychological understanding of the world, and one should take care not to distort scientific facts.
Yes.
Okay. And people are fallible. They make mistakes, and you should do your best to rectify those mistakes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, real quick, I just wanted to show you, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Jake, can you pull that up for me, please? Yeah. Can you read the title of that?
7 fundamental tenets. Yes.
The 7 fundamental tenets.
Yeah.
Now, let me scroll down briefly.
I know where this is from.
And can you read that? What does that say?
Yeah, the Satanic Temple.
Of the Satanic Temple. So essentially your doctrine and dogma, right, 100% conforms with the 7 tenets of Satanism by your own admission. Is that correct?
Yes, but if you know about the Satanic Temple, they're actually an atheistic organization that does not believe in Satan or God. So, did we lose him?
I apologize for that. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the Satanic Temple, if anybody knows, is an atheistic movement that does not believe in Satan or God. So it's an interesting thing to try to bring up, to try to align it with Satan, but there's no biblical basis that those are Satan's values, and the movement itself doesn't believe in Satan or God.
Correct. It's a secular organization, right?
Yeah.
And its stated goals are to be a subversive element to Christianity by utilizing Christian ethics against Christians. And they utilize these tenets in order to do that, which are borrowed from Christian ethics, as a way to snub their nose and say, nah, 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 nah. We got you, Christians. And you agree with every single tenet of the satanic doctrine, the secular subversive organization, which is there specifically to destroy Christianity. Is that not correct, sir?
That's not correct, actually. I'm good friends with a Satanist who belongs to the Satanic Temple, and his goal and their goal is not to subvert Christianity, it's to subvert conservative Christianity, Christian nationalism, the kind that I do think that you probably represent. So,
Christian nationalism did not even exist at the time of LaVeyan Satanism, wasn't even a thing. And the modern Satanic Temple, which took its lead from LaVeyan Satanism's 10 tenets for the now 7, right, also existed before there was a Christian nationalist movement at all, in order to remove the 10 commandments from any type of public area, in order to remove any type of public prayer from schools, things like this. I suspect these are all things you support.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
How is that not subversive?
It is subversive. I believe Jesus is subversive.
So you're a subversive.
Yes, I agree with what you said there. Of course.
Okay, gotcha. And you agree with all of the tenets of Satanism?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
Okay. So now that we have some of that clarified, can we just move on to a couple of basic questions that I have for you?
Yeah.
You converted to Christianity when you were 22?
No, 12.
12. I'm sorry. I read here that you made your final conversion or acceptance at 22. Is that right? When you were an adult? Or
no?
Okay. What did I get wrong?
A few things like the log cabin Republican thing is also interesting and incorrect. But I became a Christian at the age of 12 in a fundamentalist Baptist church and ended up in an evangelical church, then went off to Moody Bible Institute to become a pastor and graduated there when I was 21. And
I see.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I conflated the two, is you graduated there when you were 21.
Yeah.
And you now serve as a pastor in pastoral duties, correct?
Absolutely.
I have a direct question for you. You may find it offensive, but I would like to have it answered. Have you engaged in group sex with men since you've been a pastor?
No.
Never?
No.
Do you condone group sex with men?
No, I would not say that's general sexual ethic that I would endorse.
Why?
Because I believe that sex is best consensually, lovingly between usually two people. But I also, and I write about this extensively at the end of my new book, that my version of sexual ethics isn't about rules. So you're going to be hard pressed to get me to come down firmly and say something is right or wrong objectively in all situations.
Then why not engage in group sex?
Because that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, I know. But if somebody does want to do it, why wouldn't you condone it?
I think that if your values are centered on love, consent, and adult relationships, then anything can be a healthy expression and anything can be an unhealthy expression.
Okay, so then you would, if somebody came to you and said, well, there's 4 of us men and we all want to get married to each other.
Yes.
You would marry all of them together, correct?
Yeah.
You couldn't have an objection to that, right?
No, I support polyamory.
And so if they all went home that night and had a big gay orgy, you would not
an orgy if they're married. I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, okay. You wouldn't condemn it, right?
No.
Yeah. So you would condone it, you would marry it. So you do condone this activity.
Sure.
Okay. Now
the way that you're framing it now, yes.
Yeah. Now, if 6 secularists made the declaration that they were married, right, absent your authority to marry them, of which you have none, but assuming I just granted that you did, the secularists who give themselves the authority and then they all marry each other, all 6 of them, you couldn't say that they're doing anything wrong, right?
I don't think consensual adults in relationships are doing anything wrong. No.
Never.
Not if it's a consensual, loving relationship.
Because there's no harm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me then, sir, Brandon, I'm really curious about this. If your grandmother died and you dug her up from the grave and nobody knew about it and you had sex with her corpse, can you demonstrate for me the harm?
She can't consent, so yes, that would be the harm.
Wait a second. She doesn't need a consent. She's not alive. What? No. Why? Wait. What? What?
I think you're spinning yourself in circles here. My standard for sexual morality is that all sex has to be consensual.
Can a tree consent?
No, and I don't think you should have sex with trees.
So then if you have a wooden dildo, that's a no-no in Brandon's world?
I think that's a little bit different than having sex with a tree. But
why is that different?
I think sex toys and trees are different.
Because it's dead, Brandon?
I honestly am not sure exactly what.
Yeah, because it's dead, right? The wooden dildo's fine, because even though it's a part of the tree, because it's dead, right, Brandon?
This is an absurd word game. But
Can you answer my question, please? It's not an absurd word game, right? Yeah, because it's dead. So then if grandma's dead, what's the objection?
I think consent between human beings is how sex should be lived out.
Yeah, that's not a human being. That's a dead body. It's a corpse. It's not a human.
I think it's still a human being.
What makes it a human?
Do you consent? What do you think about masturbation on your part? I'm interested.
Well, I think it's sinful, and that you should stay away from doing it.
Okay,
now, I've answered that question. Let me finish. You can ask your questions, right? We got a long debate here.
Yeah.
But can I finish my inquiry, please, before you move off of it? If you masturbate with a wooden dildo, and that's conceivably fine, but having sex with a tree which is alive is not, then the only threshold breaker there is that the wood is dead. That is the only. Well, then what's the threshold breaker, Brandon?
Human.
Tree.
I believe sex. I don't concede the point that a dildo is a tree, first of all, but I
didn't say it's a tree. I said it's part of a dead tree. So then what if we just cut off grandma's head and you just had sex with that?
I believe that a sexual relationship has to be consensual between two human beings.
Yeah, but they're not what makes them human beings? They're not alive.
I'm consenting human beings is how sex should be expressed.
Yeah, I know, but that makes no sense, Brandon, because if they're not alive, what makes them now human beings?
Clarify which one you're talking about at this
point. Well, a human being. You're talking about a corpse, right? A corpse. Yeah. And I'm guessing you don't think that it's okay to have sex with any part of a corpse.
Not a consenting human being. Yeah.
Right. You can't have sex with any part of a corpse, but you can't have sex with anything that's alive that doesn't consent. So if you have sex with wood, right, that's a part of something which is dead, just like if you were to have sex with grandma's head. How am I wrong, Brandon?
I think you're wrong because, again, the way I center my sexual ethics is not through confining, but through a set of values in the middle and moving out from there. If you are engaging in a sexual practice with oneself that is consensual, I think that is fine, generally.
Okay, and a wooden dildo is fine.
Sure.
Okay, but that's
I wouldn't recommend it.
But that's part of a now dead tree. So if you say the wood is no longer tree, and the wood can no longer be the tree because the tree is dead, right? Then how does that not apply to human beings, Brandon? Can you explain that to me?
Human needs to consent in order to engage sexually with them.
Yeah, that's not my question. Can you repeat my question so I know you know it?
No, because this is what I'm going to answer.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat my question.
Fine, and I'm not going to answer.
So you're not going to answer any questions because you don't like the entailment of it. So here's the logic, Brandon. Yeah. If you have a wooden dildo, that's a part of a tree that is now dead. You say that is fine to do because it's no longer a tree because it's dead, right? It's a part of a dead tree.
It's not a consenting human being, yes.
Yeah, but you can't have sex with a tree either, right, Brandon?
Because it's not a consenting human being.
Yeah, okay. Well, wait a second.
I don't concede that it's having sex. I wouldn't say that.
So if a guy, I'm sorry, the only proper way for you to have sex is with a consenting human being, period.
Yeah, I don't think masturbation in my definition wouldn't be sex. I wouldn't say dildo is sex.
But masturbation, in your view, is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so could you use Granny's hand that's cut off and masturbate yourself with her hand?
It's non-consensual, no.
Well, wait, it's non-consensual with the tree, the dead part of the tree now, Brandon.
I reject that premise.
What's wrong with it? Where's the contradiction?
I think it's just an absurd premise. I think you know that it's an absurd
premise. Just saying it's absurd is not an argument, right? Well, that would be, so that's not an argument. So here, I'll put it in a premise for you. Brandon says only human beings should be able to have sex, right? Consenting human beings. Yeah, if a human being masturbates, that's fine because after all, if they're masturbating, in Brandon's view, that is not sex. I'm not incorrect so far, right?
That's all good.
Perfect. Okay, so if you take a piece of a tree and you shove it up your butt, right, in a masturbatory fashion, that is fine from Brandon's view, right? Because after all, there's no human being requirement there to consent to. If you use Granny's dead arm, where's the human being now?
I don't accept the premise that because Granny's dead, she's not a human being.
Yeah, no, it's just Granny's arm.
It's still part of Granny, and she is not a consenting human.
So if I got my arm cut off, that arm is a separate human for me?
No, but if
if
somebody tried to use your cut off arm for sex without your consent, that would be wrong.
Why?
Because it cannot consent.
Yeah, but neither can the piece of wood.
But the wood is not a human being.
Yeah, but neither is an arm.
We're going to keep going in the circle, and also I'm going to keep saying,
Yeah, well, what makes an arm a human being?
the arm is a part of a human being.
Does the arm have a soul?
I actually don't have answers to questions about the soul. I think that's beyond our pay grade.
Do dead bodies have souls?
Perhaps.
You think that the soul stays with the dead body too?
Perhaps. I don't know. I've never died.
So you don't know? You don't.
No.
Do you think that that human beings have a soul?
It seems likely, yes.
Seems likely. Okay, so you don't know where the soul goes. So if somebody cuts off my arm, would it stand to reason then that it could have split my soul?
I don't know.
You don't know?
It's above my pay grade.
Okay, so when it comes to then just basic ontology, if there is no soul, we can't demonstrate a soul.
Well, I think there is a soul,
Right.
as I said. I think there is. I just
Yeah, but you don't know how it operates, how it works, nothing like that, which is
No.
fine. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Okay, so let's talk about basic ontology absent Christianity then, right? If you cut your finger off, are you less of a man?
I don't know how to answer that question yet. Are you less than a full human body?
That's not what I'm
Perhaps.
asking. I'm asking if you're less of a person.
But what constitutes a person in this?
Well, from your perspective, I think a person would be like, it would have to have consciousness, perhaps self-awareness. That would be person, what a person is. Yeah. So the finger couldn't be a
I
person.
agree with that.
Yeah. So a finger couldn't be a person. So if a finger's not
But
a person,
I still think it belongs to a person, and therefore I would want consent.
what makes it? Why does it belong to you? If you're dead, nothing belongs to you. Do you think people have belongings when they're dead?
Sure, I'm sure you believe in an afterlife. Perhaps they do. The Egyptians sure thought so.
Yeah. Do you?
All
Do
right,
you
gentlemen, maybe we should get back on topic a little bit more. If I don't know if you guys want to continue the cross-examination on a different topic.
I think that this is pertinent to the topic because what we're establishing is metaphysical principles and ontology. And so what I'm trying to determine is what Brandan, I'm just doing a basic consistency check. If
Okay.
Brandan says there is no soul and he doesn't know what happens in the afterlife, right? Well, you're not sure. So
No,
it's possible there isn't. It's possible there
pretty
isn't.
I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
pretty sure means it's possible there isn't, right?
Sure. I'm an agnostic.
Okay, so if it's possible that there is no soul,
Yeah.
right? Then if the finger is cut off, right? Then I mean, even if there is a soul, that can't be what constitutes you, right? The
Yeah,
finger
I agree
cannot
with
be what constitutes you.
absolutely. But it's
Yeah.
a part of you. It's a part of you, I would say.
Okay, so got it. Now I understand what you mean by person. So let me reframe the question then. If it were the case that Granny gave consent that you could have sex with her dead body after she died, can you demonstrate the harm?
I think you need conscious consent in my sexual ethic. So no, I think that would be wrong.
Oh, you
and-
need conscious consent, but
Yeah.
that's really weird. Is because Granny's not conscious.
Exactly. So you could not have sex with Granny.
Then you couldn't have sex with a piece of wood. You couldn't have sex with anything.
I understand the argument you're making, but I reject the premise that a piece of wood that's turned into a dildo, by the way, wooden dildos sound like a terrible idea, but any other sort of sexual toy, like I think that's a wholly different inanimate object category that we're talking about versus a consenting human being.
Okay.
That you need to have sex with.
What I'm asking you for is to demonstrate the harm, not how your feelings. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't care what you believe about it, right? Like, well, my personal feelings are that's I don't like it.
The demonstrable
Your whole position is based around a harm principle. You
But
have
it's not only it.
you have
Because
three
of-
tiers. You were asked this. You have three tiers. Your
Yeah.
first tier is harm to self. Second tier, harm to others. Third tier, harm to God's creation. Demonstrate the harm. For
Yeah.
if Granny leaves behind a note saying, "I want my son to sexually abuse my body all day long," demonstrate the harm.
I think that's an immoral action.
Yeah, demonstrate it.
She cannot consent.
So what? How is that harmful?
I think non-consensual sexual engagement is harmful.
Demonstrate it. What does "I think" mean? That doesn't mean shit.
That does
Oh,
mean-
well, okay, Brandon.
That's how we all
Well,
live our lives. That's
well,
how we
Paul,
all-
but Chuck over there doesn't think it's harmful. Can you tell Chuck why he shouldn't do it other than because Brandon he just thinks
because-
you shouldn't?
we
Chuck,
also have
what Chuck?
laws. We
So
also have
Chuck's
laws.
over there. Yeah, I know we have laws, but let's say that the law said you could do it.
Then I would reject that law.
Right. So then it does, the law argument doesn't matter. So Chuck over here says to you, Granny said left a note behind saying I could bang her dead body. And Brandon, I really want to. I'm going to go do that. Can you give me a good, compelling reason not to? Your answer is
She cannot consent.
yeah. And he says, well, I don't need consent because she's dead and gave me consent.
You still need active consent in a sexual relationship.
That is active consent.
It's not. A dead person writing a note is not active. It's no different than if I wrote a note today and said someone could have sex with me. I can remove or revoke that consent. Consent needs to be active.
But if you're dead, how do you do that?
Exactly. So you shouldn't.
Yeah. So he says, okay, well, I disagree with you, Brandon. I don't think that I need to have consent from someone who's already consented, right? Because by this view, you're saying that if you rolled over in the morning and banged your wife, you woke her up, right? You woke her up with sex. That is there
problematic without consent? Yeah, absolutely.
It's problematic to do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So is that grape in your view?
Is that what?
Is that grape?
If somebody is not consenting to you having sex with them and you have sex with them, probably.
Yeah. So if I or any other man ever woke up with their wife straddling them, right? She would be graping them.
I mean, this goes into hyper individualistic contexts of relationships. You can give consent in relationships.
Yeah. Do you know what implied consent is?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know that the entirety of society operates on implied consent, including in marriage? And you kind of have to, because otherwise you would make rapists out of millions of men who wake up their wife with sex all the time and vice versa. And obviously they don't consider that to be rape. There's an implication there of consent. So if it's implied by a note from Granny, you still don't really have much of an argument here. Your only argument about why you haven't demonstrated any harm, so your principle's not consistent. Your only argument is because I just really feel like you shouldn't.
No, it's first of all, harm is one of the principles. I think do no harm is a generally good principle for all of us to live by. But also, again, I state, Granny can't consent. A note from a dead person is not active, conscious human consent.
Neither is waking your wife up with sex.
And again, I think that sounds pretty morally ambiguous to me. But
it's morally ambiguous?
Yeah, I think
you don't think that there's an implication for sex?
What happens if your wife says no?
Well, then you would stop.
I hope, yeah.
Yeah, then you would stop. But so what? There's still an implication there. From your standpoint, you know how stupid this view is? This would be like saying, anytime you're on a first date and you leaned in for a kiss, you'd be like, okay, is it okay if I kissed you?
Yeah,
is that okay? Yeah. Is that all right? Do you think human beings don't operate that way, dude?
I do.
No, the human beings don't operate that way. They don't go, oh, okay, sweetheart. Now just what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean in for a kiss. Is it okay if I use my tongue? Like, do you have to ask that? Is it all right if I use my tongue? Right? Can I give a little nibble on the lip? Do you need consent for each individual activity? Like, what do you need here, Brandon?
No, I think you're taking one statement about the need for consent and turning it into a boogeyman that doesn't exist.
Because when you say yes, there's an implication.
The point is that when you enter into any physical, sexual relationship, romantic, intimate relationship, however you want to frame it, there should be consent.
Yeah, I get it. But you do realize that when you say, well, if you slip in the tongue or things like this, there's an implication there that when she said yes
as well. I agree.
Yeah, the implication there is that when she said yes, she's also consenting to these other factors, right? Because otherwise you can create a microcosm. Sure. There would be no good reason for you to consistently not apply that to Granny's body if she left the note behind.
Well, I do inconsistently apply that to Granny's body. So.
Okay, got it. So okay, well, let's move over to some of your other contradictions. You say that sex is an immutable characteristic for men and women?
Yes, depending on how you're using the word sex. Are we talking about sex with Granny or sex as the immutable characteristic?
Sex, your sexual proclivities.
Got sexual identity, I would frame that as, yeah. Okay,
well then how can you make the case then that thousands of years ago people didn't understand sexuality if it's immutable?
Sexuality as such, talking about homosexuality, heterosexuality did not exist as principles.
What do you mean? Of course they did. It's immutable. It's immutable.
No, see, you're conflating things.
What am I conflating?
You're conflating the idea that people in the ancient world could have sex with anybody of any gender, but they didn't have a language to say that this is a sexual orientation. When I say that sexual orientation came about in the 1800s, that's because that is when psychologists came up with the idea that there are sexual orientations that are innate.
No, now you're conflating. It's a word concept fallacy. You're claiming that because the way that psychologists identify sexual proclivity with different language, that means that there was no concept of the same exact thing in the ancient world. This is categorically false.
No, it's not.
We know this. We know this from Roman emperors. We know this from ancient Egyptians.
Know what?
We know that the idea of same-sex activities or the idea that two men could love each other was a possibility in the ancient world.
Absolutely. I completely
What's
agree.
the distinction between that view and your own?
They did not see it as sexual orientation. Yes, Emperor
What is it?
Hadrian,
What does that? What does orientation here mean?
that we now believe that psychology, which you probably reject, we believe that sexual orientation is an innate part of a human being, that you are oriented towards a attraction, whether that's bi, hetero, or homo.
Yes, but if it was innate, that means they couldn't help themselves, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so totally. So then if that's the
They didn't
case,
have that language.
if that's the
That's
case, then obviously the activity, which is around these immutable characteristics, happened. So if it happened, so if it happened, then it's descriptive. So when you say, hang on, let me finish my point, then you can clarify. So when you say, Brandon, the ancient world didn't really understand homosexuality, they did understand it very well. And it was, if it's innate,
100%.
they couldn't control it, right? Then they gravitated towards this innate characteristic.
You're misunderstanding the argument I've made consistently across 4 books and thousands of videos, which is not.
It's a bad argument. I don't misunderstand it. Make the argument. Make the argument. Make the argument.
I am making it. The argument is that, yes, people engaged in same-sex relationships all throughout history. I agree. Emperor Hadrian and Antinous were in a very famous same-sex relationship in the Roman Empire. They existed. And in fact, I would even concede that in the Greco-Roman world of the 1st century, there are over 13 words for different kinds of sexual relationships between different genders. However, they did not understand that as sexual orientation, meaning that in the Roman world, you were permitted to have sex with man, woman, as long as they were a lower social status, you were legally and morally allowed to have sex with whomever you wanted. So people did not conceive of themselves as gay. They conceived of themselves as a person who's having sex with somebody that they're interested in.
Yeah, okay. But this is an immutable characteristic, yeah?
I believe so, yeah.
That attraction?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if that attraction is an immutable characteristic, then they were following their immutable characteristics and their proclivities, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, then saying that the ancient world didn't really have an understanding of this would be incorrect. No, they did. Not only did they, well, wait, not only did they, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to smuggle in this word orientation, but you're actually saying the same thing twice. You're saying they gave into their sexual orientation then, which was an immutable characteristic, and they give into their sexual orientation now, which is an immutable characteristic. You're just saying the same exact thing twice. That's it.
Yeah, the literal only argument I'm making is that the language of sexual orientation did not exist in the ancient world.
And what does orientation mean? I want to have sex with same sex.
Yes, absolutely.
Then that definitely existed.
They did not have the language to speak of it.
Yes, they did.
They did not.
They most certainly understood that I want to have sex with man. If I want to have sex with man, I can describe that I want to have sex with man. The Japanese did this. The ancient samurai did this. They have documented history of ancient samurai, and they would use boys who they were trying to make into samurai. They would use them as essentially sex toys. And yeah, they talked. And by the way, there's old books on sexuality. I don't know if you know this or not. Very, very old, detailed books
my argument
from hundreds and hundreds of years before your idea of orientation. You're just piggybacking on the same ideas which already existed.
I think you're completely misunderstanding the
argument.
Okay,
give me the argument again.
But I don't understand where you think I'm taking this argument. The argument, quite simply, this is not like a foundational point to anything, but simply an objective reality that the concepts of homosexuality, bisexuality, and heterosexuality did not exist as such in the ancient world. Yes, people understood. I don't think Emperor Hadrian would have said, I am gay. He, in his lifetime, had sex with men and women, and then he has this beautiful relationship between him.
Yes, but that's where the smuggle comes in, and it is foundational, whether you know it or not. So here's the smuggle.
Yeah.
All you're doing is taking language and adding new descriptors to old activity. It's just new descriptors. That's it, right? When you say they didn't have the command of the language, they did. They just called it different things, but it was the same exact thing.
That's
so all you're doing, you're creating this conflation when you say to Christians, they didn't really have a concept of homosexuality. Well, no, actually, they did have a concept of homosexuality. It's just that they didn't use the same descriptive terms that you use from the 1900s. So what?
They would
like,
not
so what? Why would that matter?
They would not describe it in the same way. When they thought about sex, it was more about social status than it was about an orientation or a psychological disposition.
First of all, can we clear this up? Because what you're talking about is mostly with nobles, right? And the way that peasants and non-noble classes viewed marriage was completely different than how nobility viewed marriage. Even when you're talking about Rome, for instance, when you're talking about the social classes and you're saying, well, higher ranked classes could basically at their whim, they could rape their slaves, things like this. This is true, right? But for the average Roman citizen, it was not. And when you're talking about in medieval Europe or in Japanese culture, these were caste systems. Okay. And the meaning of these things from the nobility class was completely different than it was for the peasant class. So again, these descriptors don't actually make sense.
I'm not a scholar of any of those other places. When I'm speaking of the Greco-Roman world of the first century. That is all I claim to know.
Yeah, I know. But don't you think that it's important if you're going to make these kind of bold claims about the conflation of human sexuality, and then you only isolate it to one particular culture, in this case, Rome, even though the entire rest of the world actively participated in sexual activity, that your idea that people just didn't know what the fuck it was is absurd because it's so isolated?
Because I'm a scholar of the New Testament, and that's what I'm interested in these arguments and conversations.
Yeah, well, this would go to this idea. So Romans themselves studied all sorts of cultures, right? They studied what they considered barbarian cultures. That's where we get barbarian from, because you all sound like this, blah, 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 right? That's where barbarian comes from.
Yeah.
And they documented many of these cultures, and they definitely gave descriptors for these activities, sometimes frowning upon these activities, sometimes not. Depends on which scholar you're looking at, depends on which philosopher you're looking at. But to say that the people who grasped logic, comprehensive propositional logic, which modern logic is based on, modern philosophy, didn't understand keys to human sexuality, and only through esoteric psychology in the 1900s we were finally able to grasp it, is fucking insane. What you're doing is you're using a fallacy of modernism. So you're saying the entire argument that you're using is fallacious. It's from a modernist perspective. Yes. You making the claim that we came up with new descriptors for an old phenomenon, which already was known. It was debated about in many cultures all over the world, and even the Romans themselves discussed this depending on which era they were in, based on their observations. And we know these insights because we have their observational papers of other tribes.
It's simply not true. Sexual orientation as a psychological, biological, innate disposition towards an attraction was not how the ancient Greco-Roman world thought about sexuality.
Let's see if this is true. When you say psychological phenomenon, psychology is the study of the mind. Yes?
And you don't believe in it. Yes.
Okay. Is it the study of the brain?
Partially, yes.
No.
Yes.
It's not. No. Yes. Okay. Well, so psychologists, what part of the brain do they study?
If you're going to try to make the argument that that we're going to talk about like neurology and people that are actually studying the physical nature of the brain.
Yeah, those aren't psychologists. Those are neuroscientists.
Yes.
Those are
separation.
Yeah. So there is a massive separation between a neuroscientist and a psychologist. Psychologists study
pastoral counseling classes. We studied the brain itself.
Oh, which part?
We talked about what each part of the brain does and what.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. So
the anxiety brain.
So let's dive into this. Psychology is a predictor for human behavior. That's it. That's all it even can be. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what the disease process is in psychology? What is the process, the disease process?
Tell me more about what that means.
Well, in science is only as useful as the controls which you add. So in medical science, if we're going to diagnose a disease, we use a process called the disease process. It's a step-by-step inductive process which goes through and, utilizing strict regulatory scientific controls, rules everything out that the thing can't be, therefore isolating the thing that it is. What is the disease process in psychology?
Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know actually how to answer this question.
I thought you were super familiar in your pastoral,
No, I said was that.
Well, let me help you. There isn't one. There isn't one. There is no disease process in psychology. And the reason there is no disease process in psychology is because it's the study of a metaphysical mind. It is not the study of anything which is physical. Really? Then tell me this, sir. Could a psychologist diagnose a person with narcissism? What makes them correct?
That you can see behavior patterns that clinically line up with narcissism.
Interesting. But every single behavioral pattern a person can have, they can have all of the patterns which would fit with a narcissist and not be diagnosed as a narcissist, because it's completely and subjectively up to the psychologist themselves, the studier of the mind, to make this assessment. When you have a disease, an actual disease or illness, there's a process that is absent your independent subjective mind. You go, wait, you see that big fucking tumor right there? That's the problem. And here it is, and I'll show it to you. That process does not exist with psychology. What you've done is you've made a grouping, a mind grouping, based on what you consider to be proclivities, and just renamed them. And then you try to pass it off as though it's true. So let's start with this. Give me any scientific proof whatsoever that homosexuality is an innate characteristic.
That it occurs naturally throughout the world. I think that's what we would mostly say.
Wait, I'm sorry. Let's back up. Did you just appeal to nature?
Yes, I'm going to make lots of appeals in this debate. But first of all, and also, I'm going to say I'm humble enough to admit that I'm not here to debate psychology. I'm here to debate theology and the Bible. So
yeah, but the problem is that, well, no, you're not. You're here to debate whether or not LGBTQ belongs in church. And one of the premises for that is that your worldview is dependent upon science, psychology, sociology, and a few other things. So you making justifications based on those things, perfectly acceptable for me to enter into criticisms on the tenets in which you hold the values that you make these assessments. So when we're talking about,
it's acceptable for me to say I don't understand psychology enough to feel like I can credibly debate it with you.
Great, but you can credibly base your worldview on it.
Yes, I can cite psychotherapists, psychologists, and trust their work. Yes,
based on
that their work is peer-reviewed scientifically.
Faith. No, well, actually, most of it.
Well, I am a man of faith, so
it's called a replication crisis. I don't know if you know this or not, but inside the replication crisis, almost all, right, we're talking 60-70% in psychology, even worse in sociology, cannot be replicated, which is a key component to the scientific method, as you know. By the way, can you just tell me real quick what the scientific method is?
Yes, that you're able to repeat a process.
No, just tell me the method.
I'm not going to know what language
you don't know the scientific. So you base your worldview on science. You don't know the scientific method. You base it on psychology, and you don't know anything about psychology. I don't understand. What do you actually base your worldview on, sir?
Scientific consensus, psychology, reason, experience, theology, tradition, the Bible.
Faith?
Yeah.
You base it all on faith?
Yeah, I do. I'm a man of faith, of course.
So you base the fact that we should utilize psychology, which you don't know anything about, on faith and consensus, and you base the fact that we should base these things on science on faith as well, right?
Amen.
Okay, so if you should base these things on faith, these human institutions that you just have broad faith in for no particularly describable reason, why shouldn't I have? Well, okay, yeah, peer review can be good. Yeah. Meta-analysis is way better. The problem is in psychology, you don't have a lot of that. You have peer review, that's true, but a meta-analysis for the actual proofs of reproducibility, not very good at all. So since you have faith in these things, in these institutions, why shouldn't I have faith that LGBTQ, open LGBTQ, and the activeness of gays in the church shouldn't be rejected? Why shouldn't I just have faith in that?
I don't think that you shouldn't have faith in that. I disagree with it. I think it's wrong, but I don't object to the fact that you have the right to believe that.
So do we just come to all of our moral decisions via consensus then?
No, I am actively against your view. I actively spend my life working against your view, subverting your view.
So even if there was consensus that it was the case that most people agreed with me, you would, of course, say that that's incorrect, right?
Of course.
Based on?
Scripture, science, reason, psychology. We can go through the list again and again.
Well, but all of those things you said, the things, we'll leave scripture side for a second, right? We'll just focus on the materialist perspectives. These things you said, you claim you don't even understand, and you just have faith in them as being true.
Yeah, I have a general understanding from being in with a psychotherapist for 15 years of my life. I understand how that works in my own world, and it seems to work. So I have a lot of reason to trust that that's good and true.
Faith.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, faith. So the thing is that I don't understand, because if that is the standard of just have faith, if you have faith in this thing, then it's true, right? Or at least it's the only truth we can ascertain.
No, I don't believe that we can absolutely ascertain the objective truth.
Then what makes your view true?
It's true in the way it lives out in my life. So then
if it is the case,
yep,
that the thing is only true because it's true to you,
yep,
right? Therefore, your faith would have to be true. It's true to you, right?
It's true to me, but I'm not going to say it's objectively true for all people. No.
Okay, I'm not saying it is, but even if it wasn't, right, then there's no actual good reason you can give me why subjectively, if I can't just convince everybody to agree with me in this whole Christian nationalism crusade thing in order to discriminate against LGBTQ people by pushing them out of the church, can you give me a good, compelling reason outside because I really don't want you to, Andrew?
I can give you a good biblical reason for sure.
Give me a good. Well, we'll get to the biblical ethics soon.
That's what I'm here to talk about.
I just want to start with the well, but that's not your only foundation. You don't appeal. Oh, okay. So you appeal to the Bible
as a biblical scholar. I function as a biblical scholar.
Is the Bible the ultimate truth?
No.
Okay. Well, then whatever
you think it is, yeah, don't you?
Your epistemic claim is then about the Bible, you basing your worldview off of the Bible is meaningless to me because you're already saying it's not true.
I didn't say it's not true. I didn't.
It's not the ultimate truth.
Yeah.
Okay. Ultimate being 100% true.
No book is ultimately true.
Okay. Got it. So then again, any claims you make there are going to be faith-based, and just like any claims that you, well, I'm sorry, are the claims you're about to make true?
I believe they are true. Yes.
Okay. Why do you believe that they are true?
For these, I believe there's great biblical evidence and moral evidence that they're true.
Let's start with the moral evidence.
Well, I think we've already beat that one down when we got stuck on.
We haven't beaten down moral evidence with truth. So now we're getting into epistemic claims. We're talking about epistemology. So I would like to know, what is your theory of truth?
I believe that an objective truth exists. I don't believe that we can know it objectively. I think that's quite clearly true, that every generation, we continue to wrestle with the same questions and try to get to the same truth. However, I do believe in revelation of truth. I think we get glimpses of truth. And that's in my Christian faith tradition and the way I hold the Bible. That's what I use to guide my own sense of truth.
So then truth itself is not a thing which you can know.
Objective truth is not a thing that I can know objectively.
Okay, so I don't understand. When you say something is true, what does that mean?
Well, I do think there are different kinds of truth here that we're talking about. And so is it true that we are on a live stream right now debating? Yes, that's one kind of truth claim. Okay. I think categorically it's different when we're talking about divine truths. Does God exist? What does God desire? That's a different kind of truth.
Why?
I think it's just obvious.
Well, I don't know what. It's not obvious to me. What makes them different as far as...
I'm not a philosopher, so you're not going to get me to use the correct language here and be able to dole out.
Well, I'm just trying to understand the view. I'm not even asking for a philosophical justification yet. I'm just trying to ask if there's a distinction between divine truth and the truth that we're right now having this discussion. What is it?
Because I think the divine truth claim ultimately comes down to a claim of faith. This experience that we are having a live stream right now, we can deduce from logic, reason, all those other things that help us function on our day-to-day lives.
Okay, so you know we're on a live stream right now because you know it?
Because I can see it, I can touch it, I'm talking to you. Yeah.
So then truth would rely on sense data then?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, well, what divine truth would not rely on sense data?
I don't think whether or not God exists is a truth claim that needs to rely on sense data, because I think a vast majority of people that believe in a God that exists don't have sense data that God exists.
Yeah, so what would make it true?
Faith.
Okay, so then is faith true? It's true that you have faith, but is the thing you have faith in true?
I think by the very fact that you have faith, I don't think you can answer whether it's true or not. It's a faith claim.
Okay, got it. So then when you say that claims about divinity are a different kind of truth,
Yeah.
you're actually saying that, well, we have faith, and so they're not true.
No, I'm saying we have faith because we can't prove that they are true. If
So
we could prove,
then are they, so then you can't ascertain that they're true.
yes, that is what faith is, not being able to ascertain.
Okay, got it. So when it comes to scripture and when it comes to Christianity,
Yep.
all the claims that you're making, which are faith-based, you are stating right now are
May
not
be
true. Are not
May
true.
be true. No.
Okay, well then what would make them true?
The fact that we have faith in them, ultimately, we believe as Christians that one day we will know the fullness of truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we should ascertain here that everything that you're saying or about to say to me about scripture could not be, or may not be
Absolutely.
true because it's based on faith.
I say it every single Sunday in my pulpit. Yes, that's exactly what I say.
So God may not be true.
Yes, God may not be true.
Jesus Christ may not be true.
May not be true. I have faith. I don't have certainty.
Okay. And the ethics which you are basing your entire life on also may not be true.
Sure. I'll
Mhm.
concede that.
And the only reason that you have them is because you have faith in them, right?
Absolutely.
So if somebody else does not share this faith with you, I just have a simple question for you. Why are they wrong?
I don't have a good answer for why they're wrong, except that my claims, I can hold up to them and say that if you're causing harm to another person and my faith claim says that you should love your neighbor as yourself, that to me seems wrong.
I see. So, and I think it's fair for you to get a cross-examination of your own, and I'll give you one. But the thing is that I still don't actually understand this. So if Christian nationalists make all of their claims of truth through faith,
Yeah.
What is your objection?
That I believe it causes harm to other people, that I believe it's anti-constitutional, and I do trust our system of government.
I see. So the reason that they're wrong is because they're going to do harm. So that's what we're actually. So when we get all this kind of reduced, then here's what we figured out. Yeah. Your actual objection to my worldview is that you think it's harmful.
I do. Yes.
Okay. And we have deduced that your harm is a subjective metric, which you come up with through faith.
Not completely. I would argue that some of the things that you think are subjective are not subjective. I think psychological harm and psychological data is not subjective. I do think that
Psychological harm is not subjective, really?
No, I think it's very clear that if somebody is increasing in depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation based on an experience, that is something easily seen objectively.
But could you identify it and cure it?
Yes.
How?
Religious trauma therapy is something I help people with all the time and connect people to psychotherapists all the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what is the cure rate?
Pretty high. My whole life is, I've benefited greatly from it. I can speak subjectively.
Mm-hmm. And you're cured?
I'm a lot better than I was 10 years ago.
That's not the question I asked. Are you cured?
I don't know what cure means in a psychological.
The disease no longer is there. The illness is not there anymore.
That's not the language.
It's not a disease. So what is it?
It's a disorder. It's a trauma. There are other language that's used, but
Well, what else is a language besides illness? Something not right, something not correct. So you're operating incorrectly, right? You're malfunctioning in some way.
Less than the ideal, less than an abundant.
Okay, so what is that besides illness?
I think it's a semantics game. It's not a word that
Well, semantics are super important to debates for a reason. That way we have clarified language.
I'm not a professional debater. You are. So thank you for
educating. So just let's clarify this real quick so that we have this down too. So we've deduced that truth is not only subjective, but that most of your worldview resides around faith, not just faith when it comes to God, but faith in human institutions as being true, or at least truth apt maybe. There could be truth there.
If they're aligned with my central principle of loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, and that's a subjective principle too, right? Because that might not be true.
There's no way to know it's true. Yeah.
So if we're both subjectivists, let us assume for a moment that I was not a Christian at all, but rather that I was an atheist. Okay, a secular atheist, but held the exact same views, the exact to the letter that I hold right this second.
Yeah.
How could you, the subjective observer who bases everything along faith and intuition, possibly object to me who's doing the exact same thing back?
Talk to me a little bit more about what you're trying to ask.
What I'm saying is this in very, very plain language.
Yeah.
If I came to all the views that I currently hold right now, absent God or Jesus Christ or anything like this,
Sure.
the only objection that you would actually hold against it is that it's against your preference.
No, I would look at the harm as well. I believe.
Yeah, that's going to be a subjective metric.
Well, I do think that most metrics that we function by as human beings are subjective, yes.
Yeah, so if it's a subjective metric, then from my subjective metric, I could just as easily deduce it's non-harmful.
And great, I'm glad you do that.
So if that's the case, how do you object from a person who says, no, it is? Let me give you an example. Do you think it's harmful to not label people with their correct pronouns?
Yes, but in a different, there are gradations of harm.
Sure, but do you also agree that it would be harmful from somebody who had religious values to not lie to tell them those pronouns?
I would think that that's wrong, because I would say that
I'm not asking you that. I'm not asking you if you think it's wrong.
But
I already know that you think it's wrong. I'm asking from the viewer's perspective, the person who you're asking to label them. If they think it's a lie, how can you demonstrate it doesn't harm them?
Well, see, I wouldn't use harm as the only frame. I would also use, as you so brilliantly said in your opening, niceness as a frame. I do think there's value to niceness and kindness. And I do think it is unkind to refer to someone in a way that they do not want to be referred to. Is it kind
to ask people to lie?
I don't think it's a lie.
I know, but the other person, we've already ascertained you don't know if anything is true. We've already ascertained that.
Yeah.
So you could never tell a person who said, me saying to this person over here, giving them the incorrect pronoun harms me. It harms me. Yeah. In my mind, it harms me. It harms my psychology or whatever the fuck it is, right?
Yeah.
You have no way that you could ever determine that statement is not true.
The way that you are articulating this debate, and I appreciate it and I understand what you're doing, but it's not the way people walk through the world.
It is.
No, it is not.
It is. Then why do you think we're fighting about this all the time? Do you think that people are fighting over pronouns because they just want to be mean? Or do you think that they're fighting over pronouns because they think that they're lying and that there's a truth which we can clearly see as a truth, which is you are trying to mask this truth and pretend it's something other than it is, so they feel like they're compelled to lie. That is how people move through the world.
I think that what's actually happening here is that there is a group of people motivated by political power rather than religious conviction that have stoked fears for people about what pronouns mean.
Fear is harmful. You shouldn't. Here's the thing: if you're going to engage in a behavior which stokes fear, how's that not doing harm?
I think the only reason using pronouns stokes fears is because conservatives with YouTube channels have stoked the fears of people. Perhaps,
but if absent this behavior, they couldn't stoke that fear. Therefore, you're doing them harm because it's a subjective metric. Do you understand? Like, it's a subjective metric. You can't make the demonstration that, oh, it's harmful to us if you don't do it, but at the same time not concede that it's harmful to us if we don't. Like, for me, I'm going to tell you, it's actually harmful to me when you ask me to lie about a person's sex, right?
But also, can I just say, but I would agree with, like, I don't believe the government should compel speech either. So I don't think that this should be, I do think there's room for disagreement on the issue of pronouns. I don't think anybody should be forced by law to use language.
But this is very sneaky, isn't it? Because you still think that people they ought to do it because it reduces harm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but why is it that we need to default to what you think reduces harm instead of the default to the other? So, for instance, there's way more people who don't want to use pronouns than people who do. Way more people who don't.
I would like to see the data on that.
So if that is the case, okay, and it is the case that they don't want to go and use your fucking correct pronouns, right? They just don't want to. But let's assume for a second, right? We'll just assume I'm wrong, right? But I'm just going to say this for the purpose of demonstration. Let's just say it was like 51%, okay? Every time they used a pronoun that they didn't agree was true, that's going to harm them. Why is it that you don't default to them?
The way you're trying to use harm is a very interesting way.
What way should we use harm?
I think that there's a demonstrable harm that's being done. I'm not with.
Well, that's just saying the word as the word. What is harm here?
Can you let me finish for 1 second?
Yeah, but I need you to clarify that. What is harm?
I'm trying to clarify.
All right. All right.
So I think that there's a distinction between, and I agree, I think one of the problems on the left is that we have melded offense with harm. I don't think that being offended is necessarily being harmed. I don't think feeling disrespected is necessarily being harmed. So
that's all misallocating a pronoun is offensive.
Yeah, I think it's rude. I think it's not loving your neighbor as yourself. I don't.
Yeah, but it's offensive.
Just quickly, fellas, we're going to give it 5 more.
So I don't understand how this.
We'll go into Brandon's.
Yeah, how can this be an ought claim, Brandon? Yeah. That you say that I think that when you're offensive, right, that people shouldn't take offense, but at the same time say that it's rude in some way to not tell a person the truth about what their sex actually is.
So again, my claims are rooted in the person and the faith of Jesus Christ, and therefore I believe loving your neighbor as yourself means referring to them the way that they would like to. Now, I get your point that you think it's lying to them. And to that, I would say you have every right to believe that. That doesn't mean that it's not unkind to speak whatever you believe is true.
Don't you think that it's kind to not lie to people?
I know that you think that, yeah.
Don't you think that?
I don't think it's a lie.
Do you think it's kind to not lie?
Generally, yes, but I don't.
Okay, great. So then if that is okay, well then demonstrate the truthfulness of it.
I think gender is subjective, and I believe that gender identity.
There's no truth.
Well, I think
if it's subjective, then there's no truth. So all you're saying, so here's what you're actually saying is, based on the conditions of social relativity within the society that I live, this is considered to be a social taboo, and so you should adhere to it because I don't like it. That's it. You're just saying the offense, the risk of offense here is trumped by the risk of offense to me because you just don't like it, Brandon.
I would actually say that there is biblical justification for where my worldview is rooted. And again, we can play in the philosophical space.
Why do we need to use biblical justification when the Bible may not, but it may not be true, Brandon?
I'm a Christian, and I do believe that Jesus's words are true.
Okay, can you demonstrate the truth of your Christianity for me?
Loving my neighbor as myself leads to abundant life, just as Jesus taught. I've witnessed that, experienced that.
Prove it.
I show it in my experience. I think
experience isn't proof. That's anecdote.
I think it is.
Prove it.
Experience is an authority. Yeah,
it's one experience is an authority on what?
Yes. This is, the Wesleyan quadrilateral. Experience has always been an authority for Protestants, of course.
Oh, help me out here. If somebody experiences great joy when they're murdering somebody, right? You couldn't trivialize that experience then, right?
I didn't say experience is the authority. I said it's an authority.
Oh, well, what is the authority?
There is no the authority.
Then you just contradicted yourself. You say experience is not the authority. There is no the authority. So if there is no the authority, you appeal to a authority, which again isn't even true by your own metric.
Is God.
You're appealing to God.
Yeah.
But God may not be true.
Yeah, that's why I have faith in God.
Yeah, so what you're making here is an appeal to something you're not even sure is true. If you were to go, if the tenet is logic and science and reason, right? Do you think anybody who engaged in reason, if you walked over to them and said, "I'm about to tell you something, but there's a possibility, and it's even a good possibility, it may not be true. I just want you to believe it because I have faith in it." Do you think that any reasonable person who uses reason would ever believe what you said after that?
Yeah, I think billions of people do believe that in various religions around the world.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you if a man of reason, pure reason,
I think
if you went over to him and said to him, "I'm about to tell you something that may not be true," that he would say, "Oh, well, then I should believe that." No, right?
No, I do think so. Yes.
You do think so?
I think that's what faith is about. Okay.
So very quickly, I'll wrap up with this, but so that we can get over to, your attack or whatever. So
I don't have an attack.
Here's a couple of questions I have from the biblical stance. I'll read this out to you. I would like to know the answer to this. Ephesians 5:22 through 33. This is Paul's prescriptions on marriage, as you know. Okay. Wives, submit yourself to your own husbands as you do the Lord. If two gay men get married, who's the wife?
So you're trying to make a descriptive statement, a prescriptive statement. Paul is writing to a general heterosexual context. He's not addressing same-sex marriage relationships, which did not exist readily in his world, so he had no reason to address them.
Paul was in Rome, and so hang on. Back up. Peter when you're talking about Peter, you're talking about Paul. These people were dealing with cultures which were inundated with homosexual relationships.
Not marriages.
Yeah, but no, not marriages, but they didn't make a prescription for marriage. So the thing is that are you just saying that Paul was only applying this to this particular people group and that's it?
Yeah, he was writing a letter to a specific.
So then if that's the case, then prescriptively, this shouldn't actually yield us any fruit for any marriage ever.
No, I think you're not hearing exactly what I'm saying. Paul was writing that letter to a specific church of which he was the founder and the pastor of. So he's writing about a question that was raised to him. That's what an epistle is a response to.
Sure.
And so someone asked a question about a husband and wife, and he's responding about husbands and wife. If he was asked a question about two men getting married, Paul certainly would have responded, but he was not asked that.
I see. So you don't believe that the idea of marriage is that the man takes the Christ head and the woman represents the body of Christ and the man the head. You don't believe that that's true in marriage?
I don't think that that has to be limited to male or female.
Okay, so can you explain how that would work with males? Who would be the Christ head?
I don't think it's precisely how it works with male or female either.
Well, how does it work? You're the authority here. Tell me. No, I'm not interested. I want to know, how does it work?
You're the one using a metaphor used by the Apostle Paul and taking it as an objective.
Now it's a metaphor? I thought you just said it was a descriptive claim that he was making based on the people group of the time.
You're using different verses. Paul can switch between linguistic styles as he's writing, and he does often. So when he starts talking about the head, the male being the head, do you actually think he means that the male is Christ? No.
No, it's a representation of the Christ head, and the woman is a representation of the body of Christ. So if it is the case, Brandon, that he's just silent on this, and this is, by the way, I would say Paul was kind of the authority on how it works with Christian marriage. This is how most Christians model marriage is after Paul. I just want to know, since he didn't give us anything on this, Brandon, what does Brandon think? Who is the representation of the Christ head in a gay marriage, and who's the body?
I think that either person in a male or female relationship could represent Christ or represent the church. Of course.
Okay, so Paul was wrong?
Yeah, Paul's wrong on lots of stuff.
Oh, okay. So you just don't believe that Paul was correct about anything?
He endorsed it. No, I didn't say that. See, how do you jump from that? This is the problem with your side. I say Paul is wrong on something.
Because
Paul is wrong on everything.
Because the thing is that the Bible's self-referencing, and because it's self-referencing, it has to build off of itself, and it has to be coherent. It has to be coherent.
It's not a coherent book. It's a library.
If it's not coherent, there's no reason for us to believe anything that's stated in it.
That's such an absurd argument. It's ridiculous.
That's how any historian would view anything. By the way, why would you?
The Bible is. You don't know what the Bible is.
I'm sorry. Help me out. Help me out here. I'm guessing you don't believe in Exodus, right? There's no actual physical proof that the Jews were ever in Egypt and that they were ever cast out, correct?
No, I think some of the growing historical consensus is that it was probably much smaller than the Exodus.
Well, they don't know. They don't know. The physical proof is extremely scarce, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay, but if you have foundations which are laid, foundations which are laid inside of something, and then one turns out to be false, the rigorism of the text itself should be in question.
But the Bible is not self-referential. It is a library of texts. People didn't know that they were going to be part of one compiled text, especially the New Testament and the Old Testament. And so I think it's completely absurd to try to say that the Bible needs to be univocal. It's not. It was never a book. It's a library of books.
What you're doing, again, is you're jumping ahead. I need you to address what I'm saying to you.
Yeah, address.
If you had any historical text in which a pillar which it rested upon ended up being false, would it not then be the case that you should question the rest of the historicity of such a text?
No, because I don't think the writer. Can I finish? The writer of Exodus was not intending to write history.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how would a historian verify the accuracy of a document?
In relation to Exodus, tell me what you're.
In relation to anything, how would a historian verify?
You look for historical, archaeological truth, but that's in a historical text. Exodus is a mythological text, quite clearly.
So Exodus isn't true.
It is mythically true. I believe myths contain great truth.
Yeah, no. But I mean, it didn't happen in reality, in objective reality.
I don't think it did. No.
Okay, gotcha. Didn't it happen in objective reality?
As it's written.
So the thing is, right, is that if we're talking about Paul being wrong, if you say Paul's wrong on X, Y, or Z, right, you're kicking a fundamental pillar out in which the rest of his text should be questioned, because any historic document in which you find that there's things in it which are not true or were wrong or incorrect, the rest of it needs to be questioned, right?
I agree. You should question all of it. That doesn't mean that there's not truth in it. It just means you should be skeptical. You should question, of course.
So you think that the Bible's an all-you-can-eat buffet? Like you just pick what you want and leave the rest behind?
No, I think you use good scholarship, which clearly it doesn't sound like you understand how to do. If you read Genesis 1, for instance, Genesis 1 is a poem. It's a poetic, mythic text. So the fundamentalists who want to claim that it's now a historical, biological text that talks about how the creation of the world and the universe came about, they are misapplying a lens to the text that it was never intended to bear. It doesn't make the text untrue in the lessons it's trying to communicate. It just means it was not intended to be a scientific text. So you're forcing it into something it's not, which then makes it false.
So when we say truth, right, when you say something is mythically true, are you saying that when you close your eyes and you envision a unicorn, right, that the unicorn is true because you're envisioning it, but it's not materially true? Like a unicorn doesn't exist in objective reality, right?
Let me use the metaphor that I would use, which is, because I think this is what we're trying to get at. In the myth of the boy who cried wolf, this is a fable. It is true, and it is not true. I think that is how much of the stories of the Hebrew Bible in particular function. It communicates a moral truth, but the story itself is not true.
Yeah, no. I understand what you're saying. So in material reality, the story itself never happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think? Well, then this actually, I have a bunch of questions. Then I don't even know if we'll have time to field them all. But let's just start with this. How do you think that the world came to be then?
I think that God created the world.
In 7 days?
No.
How long?
I have no clue, and it's irrelevant to me.
Okay, but he did create it.
I believe that by faith, sure.
Yeah, and is that because he told you that?
No, I believe it by faith.
So just through faith. And so if I said, well, through faith, I don't believe he did that, I'm not wrong.
No, I think you're wrong, but I can't objectively say you're wrong. No.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just leave it there and let you. I want to be fair and give you your chance. So
no, these are good questions, and I appreciate your robust dialogue.
And we might have a chance to get back into it at the end if we get a little bit of time. But how are you guys going? Do you want to take a 1 minute break and go to the toilet or anything like that?
Yeah, I could take a leak real quick.
Yeah, let me do it.
Yeah. All right. We'll take a 1 minute break.
Thanks, everyone.
Tell the woman to get me some more coffee. Yeah, so
cool.
so I'm fine with the cross-examination the other way of LGBTQ in the church. I think that we were able to demonstrate a whole lot of inconsistency with the opponent's view. So just to outline mine to save him a bunch of trouble. Yes, I think that it's extraordinarily harmful to have LGBTQ people in church. I think that generally speaking, if you want to have a robust society, then you would be focusing on the normalcy of what makes it robust. And through that normalcy, people end up having predictability, and predictability in society makes society stable. Unpredictability makes it not stable. You'll see this with markets, you'll see it with everything.
Sure.
So instead of, I'm not advocating that gay people go to prison or anything like this. This is not the advocation of the Christian nationalists, but rather that if there's going to be government campaigns and there's going to be push for regularity in society, that considering we have a birth rate which is far under replacement, and most of the West does as well, that we should be focusing our national campaigns around the normalcy of a nuclear family, a man and a woman, because they can actually reproduce. The adoption argument here doesn't make a lot of sense. All babies are adopted. There's so many, all, by the way, and there's such a huge waiting list of heterosexual couples waiting to adopt them. There's no limit. It's not like gay men or gay women, who, by the way, don't adopt much anyway, are stepping in to fill a void where they're needed. They're not. So the thing is like, I think the advocation of normalcy in society in order to, one, assist with reproductive rates, which I think is key for the world, especially if you're a Christian, right? And I would think that you'd want people around to keep worshiping. That would be part of the point here. So the thing is that's my stance. I don't think that it's good for society at all. And I don't think anybody's ever sufficiently demonstrated that it is, ever. They just say, I just want to. That's it.
Yeah. So do you think the existence of LGBT people, just the existence of them in our society, is harmful?
It's not the existence itself, it's the normalization of this as being in some way akin to a relationship between men and women, and the subversion which happens for things like marriage. So for instance, why do gay people even need to get married? It makes no sense. What is the institutional reason for this any more than secularists? Like, if you just made the declaration, I am married, why wouldn't you be?
It's the legal argument is the one I would fall down on there, that yes, I do think equality for all people, including minorities, is important. And so if two consensual opposite sex couples can have a legal status in our country, LGBT couples should have that same status as well. I don't think it harms anybody by giving them the same status.
Yeah, but when you're talking about legalism in this sense, okay, yeah. What is the actual problem then with saying, okay, you can have the same legal statuses, we just don't call it marriage? What is the issue there?
I'm pretty ambiguous on this myself. I did advocate for gay marriage because I think if government's going to call it marriage, then that should be it. And from a religious perspective, of course, I do believe that it's not a sin to be gay, so we should have access to church marriage. But in your tradition, queer people can't get married. They can in my tradition. No. In our tradition,
sin is reflective of illness. We consider sin an illness.
Yeah.
Okay. And the church is the cure. That's the tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy.
Okay.
We believe that the spiritual illness that homosexuals are suffering from needs to be treated. And so we would not be against homosexuals getting married, just not to men. They could get married to a woman, the same as a man, totally equal. So the church is actually giving you the same equal prescription. It's saying, hey, straight men can get married to women and gay men can get married to women. There is no bigotry here, sir. Yeah. It's the same exact case both ways.
But do you see the problem of how unfair it would be to have a gay man enter into a relationship with a heterosexual woman? And
they don't have to. And why do they have to do that? Nobody says they have to.
Well, you just posited the idea that gay men could get married to women.
Yes, and just like straight men can get married to women. So the church is offering the same prescription to both. It's not excluding either from the prescription of marriage and who they can get married to. Gay men can get married to women and straight men can get married to women. Both of them can get married to women. So the prescription's not changing. What's the
No.
what's the distinction?
The question is, don't you think it's unfair to a heterosexual woman to be in a relationship with a gay man who is not sexually attracted to her?
Well, this would have to have a supposition that sexuality is not fluid or cannot be influenced. And I disagree significantly with you, sir, that these are innate and immutable.
Well,
It's very clear that people have changed their sexual dynamics through faith and have changed how they do things through faith and have changed how they do things through habit. And clearly, you can do something about your proclivities. It's not something you can't do anything about.
I think that's true for some people. I acknowledge that fluidity and sexuality exists, and for some people that is a true story. I think bisexuality is demonstrable, obviously, but for those who do not have attraction to the opposite sex, I think it's unfair for them to, and I think mixed orientation marriages, anybody can Google that.
Well, what do you mean? What's unfair? Both of them can get married to women. That
Right.
seems totally that's fair. Like if I say you can't do a thing,
It's
but
not
I
unfair
can,
to me.
but
It's
I
unfair
can
to the
do the
woman.
thing.
It's
Wait,
unfair
wait,
to the woman.
Well, let's just clarify this. If I say I can, well, you don't get to make the value assessment of what's unfair from a woman's preference. The church isn't forcing women to marry gay men. The woman would be wanting to marry the man, and the man the woman. So I don't even know how you can make a claim it's unfair. To make a claim of unfairness, you would have to say, Andrew, you can do a thing in the church that I can't do. No, sir, I can't. You can't marry a man, and I can't marry a man. I can marry a woman, and you can marry a woman. So,
Yeah.
so there, what there is unfair. It's completely fair.
I do, again, I would posit that it is unfair for a lesbian woman to marry a straight man or for a gay man to marry a straight woman because
They don't have to.
Exactly, but I'm saying, and also at the core, this also comes down to the obviously theological and biblical difference here. That is at the core of where your tradition, some in your tradition, there are affirming Orthodox people, of course, but some in your tradition believe that the Bible and tradition say that
There is not. No, there's not. No,
yeah,
listen.
there are. I can recommend
Maybe schismatics, but the authority on this has been laid down from the church, and there's an official position on this. You are not to be practicing homosexual in the church as a baptized. Now, it's not to say that there's not people who suffer from recidivism or of sin, right? Or they can't have lapses, that the church is going to assist with those ailments. Of course it is. That's not what they're saying. But they're saying that you cannot be openly saying that it's perfectly acceptable to be a homosexual and an Eastern Orthodox Christian and advocate that these are reconcilable. The church does not have that stance. Nowhere.
And theologically, tell me how you get there.
So here's the thing. We can look at scripture for the theological aspect here, but the thing is the value assessment to me now for using a scriptural argument doesn't really matter much. And here's why. Because the evidences which are convincing to you are external to scripture itself, right? Us utilizing it, even if I were to concede to your points, for instance, if we're already in the vague dress here that, well, this could maybe not be true anyway, then you can just simply switch to your position to the secular idea that, well, wait a second, I still have to use reason and science and psychology, and all of these kind of end up with my harm principles. So you're mixing and conflating two different forms of ethics. So from the position of Christian ethics, why it is the case is less, or how even the Orthodox Church gets there, is less valuable then, from your view and from mine, than whether or not we can demonstrate actual harm or unfairness here. So how is it the case, sir, that it would actually be unfair to tell men they can only marry women, and women they can only marry men regardless of their sexual proclivity? How's that unfair?
I think you're mishearing that argument. But the question I want to ask you is about how are you defining faith?
So in the Orthodox lens or in the layman's lens?
How you, in your day-to-day life, think about the word faith. What does it look like?
So I tie faith, the Eastern Orthodox lens, and I'm not the authority, and I don't speak on behalf of the church. I want to make that clear, but I'll give you my best understanding. Yeah. Faith is tied with theosis. Theosis is tied with partaking in the energies of God. Sure. And that these are the affirmations of faith and what faith means. Now, if you just want like the layman what is faith. It would be a unjustified belief from a secular perspective, or it could perhaps be a justified belief absent evidence, but we would tie it to belief.
Right. Okay. And so that's part of this whole, in your cross-examination, the part that I honestly don't get, and maybe it's because I'm dense, but help me here. If we are people of faith, we are admitting that there are things about God that we cannot know for certain, and yet we have faith that they are true. Isn't that the basis of what faith is?
No, I think that there's good philosophical evidence. So I came to Christianity logically long before I came to the faith aspect of it. So the thing is like there's really good philosophical evidence, I think, for Christianity being true, and for God most certainly being true. Like there's really good evidence for this. So no, I don't think that it's contrary to logic or it's contrary to reason. I mean, secularists and Christians both are going to end up in the same position using inductive reasoning that something uncreated created everything. Like that's just inductive reasoning. There's no way around that. So the thing is like, then we quibble about, well, could it be this or could it be that? Regardless of those things, though, I would say that revelation is true. You agree that revelation is true. And there's been divine revelation in my life that orthodoxy is true as well, though I would not use that normally in a debate because ultimately this would be anecdotal evidence. I would use other evidences. In this case, though, we're talking about LGBTQ in the church. I haven't actually seen you demonstrate how it's harmful for them not to be included, as far as they must be able to have sex with each other or else it's not fair.
Well, the foundation of my argument is that it's not a sin according to the Christian scripture. As a Protestant, that is ultimately, we don't have a long tradition of robust authority or tradition that we're appealing to. So scripture alone is how I came to this conversation as a Protestant. And my study of scripture was that based on culture, context, and original languages, the Bible's not condemning same-sex relationships that are consensual and loving. Therefore, the question that I then asked was, why is the church condemning this? And that is where I get to the place that if scripture is not condemning this and there is no moral harm from two men being in a consensual relationship, why should we continue?
Yeah, so this is the point that I'm focusing on is the harm, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just granting, for the sake of argument here, we'll just grant that that I come to the same conditions in my brain, absent any faith in Eastern Orthodoxy or faith in Christianity at all, and still think there's actually not any harm in churches excluding LGBTQ individuals from participating in sexual activity with each other. Like there's no actual harm there, and saying you can't join up if you can't keep your dick in your pants with, like, what's the harm? Like what is the demonstrable harm here?
Yeah, precisely. And that's the question. But what is the harm?
That's what I'm asking you. If you say
my position is there is no harm in same-sex couples having sex with one another consensually.
Oh no, well no. There's tons of harm in that. So let's start with normalcy, right? So you want society needs to operate based on regularity. Like you agree that that's true, don't you? There needs to be regularity in society.
I think regularity changes and evolves. That's demonstrably true.
Not quickly.
No, not quickly, which is
not
why
quickly. So, but regularity does not evolve quickly, and it can't, because then people would go into a panic and this type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Reproduction is a keynote for a society to sustain itself. There's no way around that. You have to have reproduction. You have to. There's no reason for us to, in any way, shape, or form, if it offends the societal sensibilities, if it offends societal sensibilities for there to be gay pride parades, if it offends societal sensibilities in any way, shape, or form to have the promotion of LGBTQ, I can't see a good conceivable reason why society cannot just summarily reject it. It doesn't seem like it would be particularly harmful to society.
I don't think it would be.
It seems like there's a lot of bonuses. Like here, I'll give you a hypothetical to demonstrate this, right?
Yeah.
You said you would marry as many men as wanted to marry each other, right?
I would not frame it in that way, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. What if all men?
Polyamory is not necessary.
So what if all men wanted to marry each other and only each other and didn't want to marry women? Would you marry them all?
I don't think that's how homosexuality works.
But if it were the case, would you marry them all?
I don't even know how to answer that hypothetical that all men wanted to marry each other.
Yeah.
Why?
Why can't you answer it? It's a simple question. It's not logically
really
impossible. It doesn't create a contradiction.
I do, because
it is possible that men, that they're, let's say there's
like
possibly
that homosexuality is a choice, which is our fundamental difference. I don't think that there's going to be an.
Let's just say it's immutable, and the gay gene just like for some reason spreads like wildfire.
I don't think there's a gay gene, but
if there was, right, and then now hypothetically, all men want to get married to each other, and they don't want to marry women anymore. Would you marry all of those men who wanted to marry each other?
I don't even know how to answer this hypothetical. It seems too
okay.
absurd.
Well, let's try to make it less absurd. Then all men wanted to marry one other man, but didn't want to marry women anymore. Would you marry all of those men who wanted to marry one other man?
Again, on one side of the coin, I don't believe that there's a moral harm in men marrying one another. On the other side of the coin, if we're getting to the reproduction question, I think we would have a societal issue if everybody was homosexual all of a sudden.
Agreed. Now let's reverse it like that. Homosexuality is gone. It just disappears one day. Okay. And now all of the homosexual men marry women. There's lots of benefit there, not a single harm. Whereas in the reverse, if we did it in reverse, it would mean the extinction of humanity. So if we were to take what you say is the harm to God's creation, right? The reflection of God's creation. If all men marry women from now on until the end of time, clearly that is a representation of a non-harm principle in the image of God, because that's the only way you can reproduce, right? Is for man to stick penis in vagina, right? That's the only way that can happen. So, but the other way, it's not. So if all men turned gay, that could not glorify God's creation, because reproduction would necessarily go away.
But in God's good wisdom, God has only created 5 to maybe 10% of the population. That has been a stable general number throughout the past however many thousand years.
It could change. And it is increasing. No, it has. In fact, with
10% is not a threat to.
Let's take the trans phenomenon.
Trans is very different than sexuality.
Yes, but most trans are homosexual men. If they are the M to F, they are, well, by definition, they are. They're engaging in same-sex activity. Now you can make this clarification. Yes, it is true.
No, I don't think you know very many trans people.
This is what the literature says. Most M to F transitioners continue to sleep with males.
I'll grant you that.
Would be homosexual by definition. So homo meaning same,
well,
right?
Not if they're female, not if they've transitioned to female.
Well, they wouldn't be female.
They are.
No, they're not. Not even gender ideology would say that they're female.
Gender identity wise, they are female. Yes.
No, they would just say they're women. They wouldn't say they're female. Female is a sexual categorization. So yeah. So that makes no sense. They're not females for sure. Okay. So even then, and you can see the uptick in this since trans ideology has come out, which means there is at least some evidence towards social indoctrination. And the thing is like when you take into account things like unaliving, let's take unaliving, for instance, this would be a great harm by not affirming trans identity. However, if this was truly an immutable characteristic, we should have seen teens who had this immutable characteristic in the 20s and 30s unaliving themselves, and they weren't, which either A, means that social stigma really works well as a counter to the idea of you unaliving yourself, thus reducing harm, or it's not immutable. So that there's like only really 2 ways you can walk away from that with those outcomes. So here's my question. If it were the case, even 5 or 10%, there's no logical reason for us to assume it could not grow higher. There's no reason for us to assume that. And if that is the case, go ahead.
Except for the stability of those numbers over generations.
We don't know what the stability of those numbers are over generations. We only recently started
concepts of sexuality. Yeah,
we only recently started keeping tabs of this as it became a social phenomenon.
Right. So
what you're making is an estimation.
Yeah, but so your argument is based on fear that number is going to increase such that there's not going to be any more heterosexuals in the world and the population is going to end. That seems.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying to you is that if hypothetically it were the case that homosexuality increased to the point where you could no longer sustain society because people were not having sex with women. Men were just preferring to have sex with each other, and that's it. Okay. And by the way, this is a valid argument, which is brought up against inceldom, that there can't be any male incels because they could have sex with each other, right? I mean, that is an actual logical argument for this from your view. So it is logically possible. Well, I don't understand why you say no. That's a logical argument.
Because the way you're thinking is, it seems like what you're positing is that sexuality is a choice. That's not an argument I make, so I don't think.
Okay, so it's immutable. There's no reason for us to believe then, if it's immutable, that you couldn't have this immutable trait passed down to the point where over time, let's say 300 years, it was 51% of the population is now homosexual, something like this. Your reproduction rate is in the toilet. And since it's immutable, you don't want to sleep with women. You find it revolting or whatever. You could see how that would not be a great reflection of God's design, because there wouldn't be reproduction going on, right?
No, I think if that did happen, it would be God's design. That's the only way it would happen.
So if all men, let's just say, turn gay tomorrow, right? Let's just say
that must be from the will of God, of course.
It's from the will of God. Okay, so then if society went extinct because of it, you would marry all those men, right?
If society went extinct, there's no marrying of anybody. So.
Yeah, I know, but if the cause of you marrying these men led to the societal extinction, you just wouldn't care, right?
No, that would just be the will of God. Clearly, do you understand in my argument that if you believe that sexuality is innate, then it's created by God. Therefore, if all of humanity became homosexual, that would have to be God's will. So yes.
Is it God's will that you have to act on it?
I believe that homosexuality as it exists, just like heterosexuality, is God's will, and therefore we're also wired and intended for relationship.
Do people have to act on heterosexuality?
I think a vast majority of people are wired for sexual relationship. I think
I'm not asking if they're wired. Like, I'm wired to punch people I don't like in the face. Does that mean I have to punch people that I don't like in the face?
I reject that you're not wired that way. I think that's
okay. Well, what about alcoholics? They're wired to be alcoholics, but they don't. But many of them abstain from alcohol. Like, clearly, you can be wired towards an activity and then not do the activity.
Of course, yeah, celibacy is a choice. You can choose to do that. I don't think marriage or relationship is mandated, but for those for whom it is a natural wiring for them, because homosexuality is not a sin, I believe that they should engage in those relationships.
Okay, right. So then the idea here is that what you're really advocating for is that men should be allowed to have anal sex with each other, and the church shouldn't condemn it, right?
Well, I believe they should be in loving, consensual relationships with one another, yes.
Okay, I don't know what does that mean, though? What does that mean?
It is fascinating to me that you and so many of the folks that seem to follow you on Twitter are so fascinated with the sexual part, the anus and the penis that you love talking about. Why are you reducing it to the sex act and not also considering what it looks like for gay men or gay women?
I'll answer it for you.
Yeah.
Because ultimately what you're discussing here, if you had two really close male friends, okay,
yeah,
and they just loved each other. They thought that the other guy was great. They loved being in each other's company all day. They did everything together, but they never had sex. They wouldn't be homosexuals. They wouldn't be.
Yeah,
so they would just be close friends. So really, when you reduce the position from your end down, it's not that you're advocating for love between men. Men already love each other. The advocation is actually that the church says that it's perfectly acceptable for you to insert your penis into a man's anal cavity or suck him off. Like, that's the truth. It reduces to it. Like, okay, then absent the sex, what are we talking about here?
To be very frank, I think there's something deeply disturbing about the fact that it needs to be reduced to sexual from your ends. Because yes, would you say that a male and a female can't just be in a relationship and not need to have this applies across all relational patterns? Yes, you can have people that are just friends, same sex.
Right, but when we're talking about marriage, right, when in the church capacity, literally what is assumed in that, what's baked into the cake there, is the distinction between you and a female friend, right? The reason this is your wife is because you're going to have sexual intercourse with her. You're going to reproduce. This is the one person you're allowed to do that. Listen, reproduction is the key. It's a key point. It's not the only point, but it is a key point. And so the thing is like, are there relationships between men and women that are non-reproductive? Yes, but they reflect the relationships of those that are reproductive. Homosexual Homosexual sex does not do that. And ultimately, what you're doing is your worldview does reduce down to you want the church to give permission for the sex. If that was not the case, then you would just advocate that men be really good friends.
Well, I do advocate for that as well. But I will concede to that point that, of course, yes, I do believe that same-sex sex is not sinful. But it's not just the sex that we're advocating for. It is for the relationship. It is for...
Just quickly, fellas, in about 10 minutes, we're going to get to closing statements. So, Brandan, you've got 10 more minutes, whatever questions that you wanted to ask in terms of your cross-examination. Then we'll get to some closings and we'll get to super chats.
Yeah. I mean, this one, you're going to think this is nonsensical. But if I had objective evidence to prove that LGBT inclusion was not harmful and it actually fostered spiritual growth in people, would you be willing to reconsider your position?
I think, well, what you're asking me, I think, is logically impossible.
Okay.
So worldviews are dependent upon logical possibility.
Sure.
So if you were to, let's say, you say, Andrew, I don't know, like, can contradictions exist or something like this? Or you ask me a hypothetical which entailed a contradiction, I wouldn't be able to answer it for the same reason, because logical possibility can only exist within the purview of the worldview you have.
Yep.
So in this case, I would say this is actually logically impossible that this could ever be demonstrated, and logically impossible that this could even happen. It's not even possible within the confines of the worldview. So no, the answer is no, because it's not possible.
But you've asked me a lot of things that are logically not possible.
No, they're logically possible from your view.
No, there's lots of things. No. Okay, so you're not willing to...
One thing which is logically impossible that I've asked you from your view.
You're not willing to concede that if there was evidence that LGBT people experienced spiritual growth, LGBT relationships flourished as spiritual relationships in the Christian tradition, that would not be enough to have you reconsider your view.
No, I'm saying that you're asking me, what if fire wasn't hot?
You're asking me if all the men in the world turned gay and all of a sudden...
It's logically possible from your viewpoint. Where's the contradiction? Where's the contradiction to your worldview? Where is it? It's not. No, it's not absurd.
It is.
The point of a hypothetical... The point of a hypothetical is to test the logical consistency of the other person. Because you're testing the logical consistency, the view in which the logic resides, right? It only has possibility based on the view. Okay? Period. So you can imagine if somebody created a religion that said aliens can't exist, okay? Our religion is the religion against aliens existing. That's our entire religion. All of the logic and apologetics, which revolves around the idea of aliens not existing, literally starts with the foundation they don't exist. So then if you ask them, well, what if aliens existed? It would be an illogical question from their view.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes. What it sounds like to me is that both of us have constructed worldviews, and your worldview is constructed in such a way that there is no possibility that you're going to get to a place where you can accept and affirm LGBT people. I think we knew that at the beginning of the video.
Wait. I can accept that LGBTQ people exist. I can accept that there are men who have a proclivity to have sex with each other. I accept all of this as being true. What I don't accept is the idea from your view that you can demonstrate. So let's just say I even bit the bullet, right? And said, okay, it somehow it is logically possible from my worldview that this could happen, that including homosexuals into the church itself is somehow going to make the church way better and assist with the spiritual health of everybody and blah, blah, blah. Let's just say that I assume this for a second, just for the sake of argument, right? So what? Like, what does that prove? You necessarily as the one who wants to be the arbiter of change, as the radical who wants to make the introduction of the new thing to the old thing. The burden is on you to demonstrate why we should, not on me to demonstrate why we shouldn't. We already don't. It works fine, right? There's no problem here that I can see. And you have not yet once demonstrated any unfairness. You haven't demonstrated that there's actual harm. You haven't demonstrated anything.
I can, but the problem is that you cut the foundation of the evidence because you don't believe psychology.
Let's go over the evidence.
I can give you psychological data reports that show consistently that rejection from the Church of LGBT people results in higher rates of mental illness, suicidal ideation. Jesus says, by the fruit you shall know a teaching. And clearly, if the teaching of the church is producing psychological harm in LGBT people, to me, that seems pretty damn basic that must be bad teaching.
But here's the problem with this. There's a logical problem you have right away.
Come on.
Even assuming psychology bore good fruit, right, and wasn't pseudoscientific nonsense. Let's just assume for a second that it wasn't, okay? The issue that you have is, show me the counter study on the harm of the people who are in these congregations, right, and the harm that they perceive by allowing these people in. That doesn't happen. And do you know why those studies are not conducted? Because the harm principle here is not consistent, because most of the funders of these studies are, you guessed it, LGBTQ groups, aren't they? In fact, I bet you anything that any of these studies, psychological studies that you're going to produce, and I'm happy if you produce them, I will literally send them off right this second, and we'll find the source. And I can almost guarantee you that there's going to be one of two sources, and both of them are going to be gay advocacy groups.
No, not the American Psychological Association or the American Psychiatric Association. But again, you're already cutting out this because you have I'm actually stunned that you don't believe that psychology is
the former head of the American Psychological Association came out as a whistleblower years ago and said that gay conversion therapy was bearing a lot of fruit, and that activist groups were able to infiltrate into the AMA with their political agenda to declassify homosexuality as a mental illness. That this was from outside agitation groups who were pushing
one source versus dozens upon dozens of studies over the past 20 years.
The thing is that most of these studies are not reproducible. They have a publishing bias. The publishing bias is often based around the funder. You can imagine if I said, well, I have tons of studies which are funded by Christian nationalists that say, it hurts the psychology of Christian nationalists if we're not allowed to not have LGBTQ in our church. You would immediately say, wait, this is bias. That's unreasonable. This is ridiculous. You would say the exact same thing. So the thing is like, look, I want to see, if you want to really do scientific evidence, you want to really convince me with a scientific evidence, then do it the proper way with proper control sets. Control set 1, LGBTQ group feels discriminated against, so therefore it harms their psychology. Okay, I'm willing to concede.
That wouldn't be it precisely. It's much
worse. Okay, but I'm willing to concede that. Okay. But show me the counter data for all of the other people which have to deal with that and what their psychology is like. Do you have any of that? No.
Tell me what they have to deal with. What does that mean?
It means that the idea of you attacking, like, let's say, for instance, you were fundamental Muslims, right? Like a core part of your belief is like that homosexuals have to be executed, let's say. Like, let's just say that that's the core part of your belief. Are you saying that necessarily if people came in and said, no, you have to deal with this now, right? We're calling ourselves Muslims and we wrap ourselves in like a rainbow shroud, right? And march around in the streets and things like this. Are you saying that that's not going to psychologically upset all of the fundamentalists? Of course it is. So when we're talking about the demonstration of harm, the same thing would apply here with fundamentalist Christians. You need to show me that it's not harmful to me when I say, wait,
it's not
based on my faith and based on my truth, you're not allowed to be gay and a Christian. And for you to claim that you are, it hurts me psychologically.
You've already conceded that it's not harmful. You said the Eastern Orthodox Church is happy to have gay people in the congregation, so clearly it's not harming anyone. Not as acting homosexuals, but to treat them. How do you know? Do you kick out people who masturbate? Are they allowed to participate?
No, they're there to be treated for masturbation, or they're there to be treated for these things.
How do you know if they're masturbating?
Confession is for.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea is that you have to take them. The idea is that they're telling you these things, these spiritual struggles that they have, so that you can assist with those struggles. That's what the whole point of it is. And so the thing is like, that's the only way you could ever do anything, by the way. Right. So they let you know what the sins are that they're experiencing struggles with. Your spiritual father, in this case, your priest, his entire job and that of the church as a congregation is to assist you with not just with sin, but in all aspects of life, to assist you if you're in financial straits, to assist you if you're having marital issues, to assist you for all sorts of things, because there's the community aspect which goes with the spiritual aspect. So here's the question. The question becomes like, if you want to uproot that, if you want to uproot those fundamental beliefs, it would be impossible, I think, for you to demonstrate that would not be harmful to the people whose beliefs you're uprooting.
I think the degree of harm is a difference here. And I do think that, there is, of course, psychological data, I'm sure, would support that forcing anybody to believe one thing or another thing through some means of force is going to be harmful. But I do think it's objective in any situation, whether it's homosexuality or...
Nobody's using force against LGBTQ people.
Sure they have.
They're not using force to reject them from the church.
Yes, they
What
are.
force is being used?
Have you seen Steven Anderson down in Arizona? Have you seen...
Yeah, what force is he using? What force is he using?
He's literally talking about getting guns, lining them up, and shooting them. So that sounds like force.
Yeah, so wait a second. So you can't say that if you have somebody who is utilizing a rhetoric against the laws of the land, right, that this is a reflection of mainstream Christianity. It most certainly is not. That's one. And two, but two, the thing is like even you saying him talking about this, right? Him talking about this, that is not actually the use of force. Same thing. If you say, well, wait a second, we're not forcing you to accept us. We're just petitioning that you do. Okay, we're not forcing you out. We're just not including you. What force are we using?
To your point, I'll concede to you that I don't think all situations of exclusion are force, but I do think when you're a young person sitting under the teaching week after week, or in a family week after week, where you're being told that this part of you, which you believe is innate, that you did not choose and you cannot change, is fundamentally broken, flawed, and if you take the Bible literally, worthy of death, that is going to have psychological impact. And I do believe there are ample studies that show that. Sure,
there'll be psychological impact the other direction too. If you say you have to accept, so all you're talking about is a mind state of feelings, right? Which is a thing that you are in control of, is your mind state. And so the thing is, when you say, wait a second, this is harmful because you won't include. Okay, well, it's harmful if I can't exclude based on what my priority values are. So for instance, if you said that I have to accept, I don't know, like a kid diddler next door, right? You have to accept that, Andrew, right? And I'm not drawing the comparison saying homosexuals are kid diddlers. It's not what the point was before you go there. I'm sure you've heard that a million times, right? Though we could get into it, but the point is that if there was, right, and you say, well, you have to accept it. No, I don't. Why do I have to accept it? No, I don't have to accept it. They can fuck right off. I don't have to accept it at all. They can kiss my ass and screw off, right? I don't have to accept that. Why should I? And if you say I do have to, how could you then not make the same claim? It's the same thing. It's the same type of psychological harm, same kind of psychological harm that you're experiencing. But yeah, so then this is the thing, right? Yeah. So what you're talking about is freedom of association here.
Okay, so I mean, at the end of this,
just quickly, fellas, we're going to wrap this up in a minute. So last little bit here, and then we're going to get into supers. I know, Brandon, you've got it hard out at 8 o'clock. So yeah, we'll just wrap this up after a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of going towards closing statement, but it does seem like, and I think you've pointed this out, that we have two fundamental, very different starting points and assumptions. I know you believe that my worldview is inconsistent because I rely so heavily on subjective knowledge and what I would call faith. But because we don't have the same authorities, it's impossible to come to any sort of agreement on almost any of these issues. And
yeah, but that's where you fail, though. You see, because there is no normative authority for which we can appeal to, and you don't even think that there is one which is possible.
I do believe
you don't. Okay, what is it?
God.
Okay, God. Okay, so we're both appealing to God. I say I have divine revelation from God that LGBTQ people cannot be a part of the church. You make the counterclaim. I have divine revelation from God that they can be, right? Who do we go with here?
You have to use logic, reason, my spiel.
All right. So the normative authority can't be appealed to if there's disagreement based on the normative authority. So there isn't one. So ultimately, if we have to appeal to reason and logic and all these other things, that's fine. But I've given you plenty of logical reasons why there is no unfairness. I've given you the same logical reason back as to the harm principle and why that doesn't make any sense in this context, because everything that you claim is harmful from being excluded. I can make the counterclaim. I'm being harmed by not being allowed to exclude, thus curtailing my freedom of association. So the thing is like all of these claims that you make, you don't really have a good grounding to make any type of rejection to me, except because really your whole worldview reduces to my preference. My preference, Andrew, is that you accept me. And I'm like, well, my preference is that I don't. And so all that's going to end up coming down to is consensus and force doctrine, ultimately. Like, what else can it come down to?
Yeah, and I would argue, I think that this kind of very put together, objective sense of worldview that you have based on all of the philosophical arguments you're making is, again, it's just a constructed worldview. It has no objective basis in reality either. I think we're all functioning from the same place because
I'm willing to grant it. I'm just willing to grant the entire thing because it just doesn't hurt or refute in any way that LGBTQ shouldn't or should be in the church. All you're saying ultimately is me, Brandan Robertson, has a set of preferences which are subjectively informed by other things that I can't even make the claim are true. Because of those things, I want you to accept me. Okay, I'll do the same appeal. Andrew Wilson, don't have any objective basis for truth and use logic and reason and came to a totally different conclusion than you did based on those subjective things. Why is Andrew wrong? Brandan says, well, he's not. Okay, well, Andrew, why is Brandan wrong? I say, okay, well, he's not. So this reduces to a force value. It always reduces to a force value, ultimately. So I say, okay, well, no, I'm just not going to associate, and neither is the church, and we're going to widely condemn this. You don't really have any metric for which to say that's wrong. You don't really have one.
And I do agree that at the end of the day, we're going to see who wins this argument. And I do think that our side, because it's on the side of God and truth, is going to win at the end of the day.
Well, is it on the side of truth?
That is a very, very good place to wrap up and to get into closing statements. So, Brandan, you opened before. So, Andrew, you can open with your closing statements now. We'll say probably won't need more than 2 or 3 minutes. So
that way he gets the last word. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, cool.
Because you did open first. So look at that. Jake running a debate the proper way. I was robbed of my last word in the previous debate. I was pretty upset about that. But I mean, to be fair, the only way to be really fair is if you're the opener, you get to have the last. I think that's fair. So first and foremost, I did enjoy the debate. There was some blood sports in there, but I think it was good for Brandan to hear a lot of that. So here's the thing. His entire worldview reduced, when you reduce it right down to its base, you can just agree with it. You don't even have to disagree because there's no way for him to make an objection other than from the perspective of preference. And if that's the case, then he has no real grounds for which to attack your preferences back. So if it's just a reduction to preference, my preference versus your preference, then we just get down to the consensus of the majority and force doctrine every single time. So this would mean that if I can convince enough people that Brandan and LGBTQ should stay out of churches, his only objection there is like, well, I just don't prefer that that's true, or I just don't prefer that happened. And it's like, well, so what? I prefer that it does happen. And this you'll find reduced in Christian nationalism versus this worldview. You found that he agrees with all the tenets of Satanism, and all of the tenets of Satanism also reduced to this, right? No matter what, you can always reduce this worldview down to its actual absurdity, because the absurdity is just preference. When he says, I want to make an appeal to the Bible, well, he can't make an appeal to the Bible because he doesn't know if it's true. He said, I want to appeal to psychology, but I can't defend any of its principles or values. I want to appeal to science, but I don't even know the scientific method. I want to appeal to all of these different things, but can't make a statement they're true, don't know anything about them, don't even understand why I follow them. And then he says it's due to faith. Okay, great. Faith is a wonderful thing. I don't dispute this or disagree with this in any way. The problem is that when you have such a low value epistemic foundation for faith, there's no justification even for having faith. That just becomes another set value of preferences again. So it's like, why should I even give a shit if he has faith? I shouldn't, right? I shouldn't even care because there's no real set value there for him. It's not even true. Like his faith, by his own admission, might not even be true. And the Bible, probably not true, or maybe true, but at least a lot of it isn't true. Like Exodus, that's not true. Genesis, that's not true. What Paul says, a lot of that's not true. It's only true in the sense of good storytelling, but like materially true, there's no material truths there whatsoever. So everything he appeals to, he claims is false, and you can't know the truth of it. He doesn't know the methodologies behind the very things he appeals to, which is fucking insane. He makes category errors based around human sexuality. He claims are immutable. People could never have understood them, even though they were immutable and engaged in them all the time. And then what he does is he kind of inserts this loaded language of, due to psychoanalysis and modern psychology, we're able to give descriptive terms they didn't have before. Are those terms true, though? Well, no, we can't even know the truth of those terms. And from the psychological perspective, I would say in the study of the mind, I could make counterclaims on these all day long, and they would be just as true as his, because you can't demonstrate them scientifically. You cannot demonstrate a claim of the mind scientifically. Science doesn't even try because you can't make controls for it. They can't do it. So ultimately, the whole thing reduces to this, and I'm just going to be blunt with this. Mr. Robertson is not a Christian. It's not possible. He can't even make an appeal to Christianity because he doesn't even believe in it, okay, or the truth of it. He also can't appeal to psychology, can't appeal to medicine, he can't really appeal to anything. He doesn't even understand the basic foundations of any of these things. So as he's going through his worldview, the whole thing just reduces to this, ultimately. I believe, Andrew, that there is harm in the exclusion of gay sex from the church. That's what it reduced to. He agreed, right, that it had to reduce to that, okay? And I say, well, I don't think there is. Then the burden falls upon you to make the demonstration that it is. And Brandan never, ever made it. He never, ever made the demonstration. So I gave him ample opportunities, right? And while I enjoyed, like, you really need to think about this, bro, because you really are just reducing your worldview to my preferences. And so you have no way to make a claim of justification against somebody else's preferences, including if they enslave you, if they rape, if they do horrible things to you. You have no grounding foundation from which to object because it's just their preferences versus yours. And he who has the force wins. So I'll leave it at that. I did appreciate the spirited debate.
And just before we get into your closing, Brandan, we are going to be taking callers after this, after we read a few super chats. We've already got some down there. We have also got a poll in the chat at the moment, guys. The first one, should the church be accepting of LGBTQ plus people? 84% of people said no, 8% of people said yes, 7% undecided, 500 votes. So guys, get your vote in now to see if that has changed at all. Brandan has a big opportunity to bring some people over to his side, and we'll see how that goes. So like I said, Brandan's going to close up now. Then we're going to read some super chats. Then we're going to have some call-ins. And guys, some people talking a lot of smack about Andrew in the comments as well. Zen, Loren, and a few others. Come and call in, guys, because you don't want them to just be all directed at Brandan. So, Brandan, with that, your closing statements.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this debate. And I know, and I knew entering into this, that my worldview and expertise is rooted in a progressive understanding of biblical interpretation. And that's my sweet spot. And I do appreciate, Andrew, the way that you've pushed on some of the philosophical weak points of my arguments, willing to concede that. At the end of the day, though, I do think that psychological data is clear that LGBT exclusion in the church does result in demonstrable harm to LGBT people, especially LGBT youth. I do think the preponderance of the evidence from biblical scholarship is that the Bible does not condemn LGBT people or our lives in love. And I believe that there is clear good that comes from LGBT people being in consensual, loving relationships and having access to the same full equal rights that all other heterosexuals have in society. I see no harm. I see only good. And yes, that might be based on my own experience. Yes, ultimately, all of my claims when it comes down to ultimate and objective truth do rely on faith. And I would say that I do believe that Andrew's view and anybody else who holds his view from a Christian perspective ultimately relies on faith at the end of the day. You can have philosophical arguments for God and for your religion, but at the end of the day, it's the leap that is going to be into the faith category, not to an objective proof that God or any of the theological claims are true. But most of all, I'm just grateful that this was a spirited and good debate. So thank you both for having me.
All right. Thank you very much. So we're going to read out a few super chats, guys. Then we're going to read out the results of the poll. And then we are going to get into some callers. So I'm going to speed read through these, guys, unless there's a question that we really need to address. So Eddie for $10 says, Brandan, how would Paul in Romans 1:26 referring to, how would you answer, Paul? I think you get what the question is.
Yeah. Romans 1:26 is quite simple. I would argue that in the first century Greco-Roman world, the primary way that same-sex sex took place, primarily, not only, was between people of higher status and men of lower status. And I would say it's sexual exploitation and abuse. And so what Paul is referring to, and this did happen among both men and women, is the sexual excess of the Roman people. Paul says that the people engaging in this acts are idolaters. So he's referring to pagans, and they're unable to control their lust. And so they sexually exploit and abuse people of the same gender. And I agree with Paul that that's unnatural and wrong.
Yeah, where does Paul actually make any statement about the fact that they're being abused, or that there's a social status distinction in the category for their sexual intercourse?
Yeah, this is why you need to read the Bible with context. We know that the
So he doesn't say that, right?
he doesn't say that it's consensual, loving same-sex relationships either. So argument from silence.
Yeah. So, well, the thing is that you're actually making an inference here that you can't that you can't prove, but we do have the proof on our side for what Paul is saying here. And when you're talking about the social context, not every relationship was about social status. This is the heart of this argument. But if that is the case, then why would Paul not have made a distinction and said something like, well, unless they're in a loving relationship with each other? Why wouldn't he have just done that? They could have. And by the way, those relationships existed.
Barely.
But they existed. Barely. And the thing is like, no, it wasn't all about just raping the peasant. Like that was not, no, that's not true.
Read Roman law. Read Roman law.
Listen, I've gone through all sorts of Roman law, pagan law. Okay. Yeah. It is, you are correct in the fact that there is, access nobility does have to people who are under them. They couldn't do it to Roman citizens unless the Roman citizen agreed to it for some price or something like this, because they wanted to. All right. They could do this with slaves, but the average citizen could do it with slaves too. But there were also same-sex couples who just did it because they wanted to.
But see, that's the problem. In the Roman consciousness, it was not permissible for two Roman men of equal status to have same-sex sex. It was permissible.
It was just that society said, oh, that's kind of gross because one's the dom and one isn't the dom. The person who was the mounter was considered the person who was in control. That doesn't mean that they were saying you can't do it or it's not permissible. You are very clever with your language here. It was permissible. It's just that there was a social stigma. And by the way, if there was this social stigma, Paul would have pointed it out. He pointed out social stigma constantly.
No, not on this.
All right, guys, we're going to get to the next one. I'm just going to read out 20 and up because we need to get to the callers as well. So the Ghost of Pinochet said, ha, logic trap at some stage. Aircraft Sparky for $20 said, how can this heretic be a pastor when he is unsure of a soul and openly flaunts his violations of edicts broken down in Leviticus 18:22? It's an abomination. There is no wiggle room here. Blasphemy. You want a quick response to that, Brandon?
Just simply, obviously, I think Leviticus 18:22 is referring to the sexual abuse being done by the ancient Egyptians and Canaanites, as it says in verses 1-3. And I'm a pastor because progressive Christian denominations allow their pastors to be honest. And so I identify as a Christian agnostic. I don't know the answers to all of the theological questions.
Okay. Andrew, you got anything for that one?
Yeah. What's a Christian agnostic? Just summarized.
A person who has faith in Jesus, but also admits that they don't know ultimately the truth.
That Jesus even existed?
I believe that Jesus certainly existed as a historical figure. Yes, the historical data is pretty clear. But.
All right. And Silent sent $100 and said absolutely nothing, which is just delightful. Joshua Clan for $20.
He true to his name, huh?
Don't you love it? Joshua Clan for $20 says 2 Corinthians 11:14, for such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. I'm reading good tonight. Normally I can't read so good, but yeah.
Ready? The good news is I don't identify as an apostle, so that can't be about me, but thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I can't read that one out. Okay. Cov something said for $20, a church should accept the LGBT community so Christians that seek him to follow God and live accordingly will flee the churches that create loopholes for sin. More concern on what God accepts and not the church is the only way. Andrew, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I've heard this argument before. So the basic argument is, by essentially the congregations or this type of thing that do allow the influx of LGBTQ, which are mostly Protestant, let's be real, though he's right that Catholics have softened their position a bit, but they still don't allow openly gay priests. They don't allow females to be priests. They don't allow any of that. So, like, I'm not going to lie and say they do, because they don't. They don't. But they have softened a bit on the rhetoric, though even then they seem to have like various justifications for why. That I'm not even going to beat them up on just yet. It does seem like it's moving that way, but we'll see. Ultimately, though, it's Protestants who mostly have this problem. So what his claim is like, by opening those up, you're going to see which churches are false, right? And so then people can leave those churches. The problem is that when you create normalcy around this kind of thing, it can take root. Heresy does this constantly. It takes root, and if it takes enough root, it's really hard to root it out, because it becomes a form of social normalcy. And we can avoid that by instead creating the social stigma, which is desirable for Christians, against the open advocation of homosexual sodomy sex, which is what is being advocated for here. Not men loving men, not it's actually just reduces to want to have sex, the anal cavity. Because of that, we want you to accept it. We say no. So you have to be very cautious in the wording and the normalcy here. So I reject this argument. I think there's good evidences against it.
All right. And Ryan Slater gifted 20 memberships. What a great man Ryan Slater is. Darkimer for $20 says, thank you, the King of Australia, for hosting this debate. Not one step back. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
King of Australia himself is coming for a visit.
That's what they call me these days. Kov, again, for $50. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Says, when the Israelite men left their aging wives to marry younger women, God told the men that he did not recognize their new marriage despite it being consensual, and told them they had to return to their previous wives to be in good standing. Brandon?
I think that's a beautiful story. It's about protecting the rights of the women that were being abandoned by men wanting younger women. So yes and amen to God doing that.
All right. And last one here, Wrongful Rage for $50 says, no amount of conjecture makes you right. The context you espouse is incorrect upon analysis, Brandon. All right. So we're going to end the poll now, guys. And then we are going to get some callers going. Just wanted to say thank you very much to both of you. I really appreciate it. It's been a good spirited debate, and there wasn't too much over talking, which is fantastic. So the results of the second poll are as follows. Should the church be accepting of LGBTQ people? Yes, 7%, no, 88%, and 5% undecided. So I think that's actually gone down a little bit for you, Brandon.
I
think
figured
you
as
had
much.
yes 8 before, and then it was 7% this time. So Andrew actually managed to grab a little bit of the minority there. But you're definitely on a way turf here, so we do appreciate you coming over, Brandon, and having the debate. So
congrats.
Appreciate it. And we're going to bring up some callers now, guys. Still accepting super chats, guys. If you do want to grease my palm, still you can. I will accept it. So starting with Ashley.
Hello.
Have we got Ashley? Is that in? Can you guys see Ashley there? Or is that not in?
I can't see
you've got to
anybody.
change it to a 4-person thing.
There we go.
There we go. Ashley, who is your question directed at? What is your question?
My question is directed at Mr. Brandon. I'm curious to know, when did you become a pastor and Christian, and what makes you really secure in, like, why do you believe what you believe and still think you're considered a part of Christianity?
Yeah, I became a Christian at age 12 in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and I became a pastor about 10 years later after studying and getting a master's in theology and a bachelor's in pastoral ministry. I think I'm a Christian because I believe the definition of Christian is one who declares Jesus as Lord and seeks to follow Jesus's teachings. And that's the basis of my faith, the basis of my foundation. And that's what I seek to do every Sunday in my pulpit when I preach. So,
Can I ask one more?
Yep, make it quick.
Okay. When did you find out that you were gay?
I kind of knew during middle school, but I didn't. I did conversion therapy. I tried to be healed of my sexuality, and it was when I was like 22 that I got publicly outed in Time magazine, and that's when I came out. So
Heal? Like, so do you still consider it something like an ailment that needs to be healed?
not anymore. I did in that time. My theology was similar to Andrew's. Actually, I was flirting with the Eastern Orthodox Church and tried to be healed, but it didn't work.
You can still go back. They'll cure you, man.
God works. I mean,
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley.
Appreciate that. We've got RC here as well. RC, welcome to the conversation, my friend. Who is your question for, and what would you like to ask?
For Brandan.
Hey there.
So, hi. So, clarifying question. You claim that a romantic relationship is not sinful so long as that it involves two consenting adults, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then is it sinful for two consenting adult males to be in a romantic relationship if they're siblings?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I would say that what we know from incestuous sex is generally that it does not result in a procreative version of it. It does not result in good.
But that's why I said two males. I was specific.
Yeah. So I would say
two males.
Yeah, generally I would say, because the law is clear on incest, that I would say it's wrong. But
What if the law said that it was acceptable for two men who are brothers to have sex with each other? Would you have any objection then?
I have no clue. I don't know how to answer that question. So,
Well, it would be with, I can tell you how. You would say yes, or you would say no. Those are the two ways that you would answer that question.
yeah, and I plead the fifth because I'm not comfortable with that question. I don't think that there's a inherent moral harm in a consensual relationship, but I don't also, it's not something I'm ever going to advocate for or promote, because I do.
But those are the qualifiers you put.
Yeah, but I also said it's illegal.
Adults.
Yeah.
So you appeal to the law?
Yep, on this I would.
Okay.
But if the law changed, yeah, that's the question, right? Like if the law changed, what would the answer be then?
If the law changed, let's have that conversation.
I have one more question.
Go for it, man.
There's time. Okay, because you also in the debate said that you appealed to nature.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of species of animals that engage in rape.
Yeah.
So if you're appealing to nature, So if you're appealing to nature, then is grape immoral?
But remember what I said, one of my standards is consensuality. So I don't believe that's consensual. When I appeal to nature, I'm appealing to the fact that homosexuality is occurring in many thousands of species, not that everything animals do is good. It's not consensual.
So then don't appeal to nature.
No, I can appeal to nature because homosexuality is a natural occurrence.
So you selectively appeal to nature just like you selectively pick and spark.
Yeah,
you also shouldn't do that because it's fallacious. So it's an appeal to nature fallacy. The appealing to nature itself does not give us the proper conditionals for the argument. Just saying a thing occurs in nature, therefore there's an ought there.
Which is why my whole argument wasn't nature. It was one part of the argument that we actually didn't address in the debate at all. So.
All right. Hey, thank you, Jake. I appreciate the time.
No worries, RC. Take it easy, man.
You too.
All right, we've got what was you, Jonathan or Gail? Which one would you rather?
Who's Gail? I never heard of this guy before.
Okay, yeah, sure. All right, what's your question and who's it directed at?
It's for Brandon. Just a couple quick questions. I have to be heading out soon myself. With Romans 1:26, let's just hypothetically say the traditional interpretation of Paul was talking about all forms of homosexuality is correct. Would you say Paul is wrong then?
Yes.
And can Paul be wrong in his epistles?
Yes.
And would you say Galatians 3:28 is correct then?
I think that the way you interpret that, I think we're going to interpret those words differently based on our theological context. But yes.
Well, no. Galatians. Okay, yeah, you know what Galatians 3:28 is, right? I'll read it out. Oh, okay. So I'm just wondering, how do you determine that difference then?
So I believe, as I said at the very beginning of the debate, I believe Scripture is inspired by God, right? But that doesn't mean that it's without error. I think it's a human product. And so the Apostle Paul often, even in the Scripture, the Apostle Paul says things like, I'm giving you my opinion, not a dictate. And I think there are areas where Paul says lots of things that are very context specific to individual congregations that he was writing to, that are not meant or were never meant to be applied universally 2,000 years later. And so it's a case by case way of engaging with.
Yeah, but But if you're going to say that the Bible is inspired, and sure, I could accept maybe Scrabble errors, but ultimately the core messages behind it would have to be infallible if it's going to be inspired by God. Would you say God's not perfect then?
No, I don't think inspired. I think you have a different definition of inspired. I think many people are inspired by God. I'm inspired by God. You're inspired by God when you go to church.
Yeah, but if you're going to make moral oughts for the church and ultimately for society, you're going to appeal to the Bible. It wouldn't make sense if it's not perfect, at least within core messages.
None of the authors of the Bible thought that they were writing a document that was going to become the moral.
Whether that's not relevant. Whether or not they thought they were writing a full library.
God didn't write the Bible either. God didn't write the
Bible.
Then
why are we using the Bible then in the first place?
Because it's the library of texts from the tradition that I belong to, and therefore it has authority in my tradition. But I don't think it's a universal.
We can appeal to tradition only when it appeals to your tradition. Then
No, I'm talking from my perspective. However, the way that I use the Bible because I'm a Protestant Christian.
Everyone has their own perspective, but how we know which perspective is correct then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you heard that all throughout the debate. I think.
Yeah, well, how do we know? Why should we prefer your perspective over Andrew's?
You shouldn't.
I shouldn't.
That's eventually the conclusion.
No, why are you here? I don't mean to be rude, but why are you here?
The point is simple, that I don't think Andrew's perspective is objective. I don't think mine is objective. I think you have to use your own moral reasoning and argumentation.
Is Andrew subjectively wrong then?
Yeah.
But he's not objectively wrong. Oh, okay. Well, then Andrew can just say you're subjectively wrong. And he's perfectly correct.
That's how we end it. That is how we end it precisely.
That's how it reduces, right? So the thing is like with when it comes to these epistemic claims, right, the claims of knowledge, and then when we get over to the ontological claims, we didn't get into those quite as much. But his grounding knowledge claim just comes from preference. And so he really doesn't have any ground to say that my preference is in any way wrong, or that any prescription that I would make, which would be adversarial to his own, is in any way incorrect. He just can't make that claim. He could just say, well, it violates my preference, and I'm the ultimate arbiter of all things which are good based on my preference. It's like, well, so am I.
I just got one last question, or maybe a line of questions, about 2-3 minutes, and I'll be off. So
make it quick, because we got to move it on pretty quickly.
Of course. So let's just say, for example, I read the Bible and I say, okay, I say most of the Bible is true, but I don't believe that Jesus has to be of the Messianic line. He can't be of David's line. Would that be wrong in your opinion, Brandon?
No.
That won't be wrong. So the Bible, even the Bible says throughout all the prophets says it has to be of David's line.
I think you're misinterpreting. I think you're misinterpreting the prophets bordering on anti-Semitic. I think reading back into
that's not my exposition.
But I'm saying reading back, I think it's a problem for Christians to read back into the Hebrew Bible things that are not there. And I don't think, I think that reading Jesus into the Davidic line or those images of lions, I don't think that's a helpful theological move to be making.
Okay, 2 last questions, because I want to have other callers come on. First question for Brandon. You brought up anti-Semitism. Keep it TOS friendly, of course. I don't want Jake getting nuked off YouTube. Why would that be objectively wrong then?
Anti-Semitism? Because it doesn't love your neighbor as yourself, and that's my guiding value.
Okay, and then my next question then is, why is that objectively good if ultimately the Bible is not factually correct, objectively correct?
I didn't say that. This is the thing that I keep finding in the conservative argument. When we say that you need to interpret the Bible contextually, it doesn't mean that all of the Bible is inaccurate or unreliable. It means that you have to read it in culture and context.
Yeah, but then
the Gospels are historically reliable.
I understand your point. This is my last statement. But if you're going to appeal to the Bible, but then at the same time says the Bible isn't always correct, why are you appealing to the Bible?
Because the Bible is one of my authorities as a Christian.
And I would say that's a circular argument. But anyways, I have to go. I know there's other callers. Thank you for entertaining me. You as well, Jake. I'll tell Gail that, he failed. He didn't show up.
Get out of here, Gail. Get out of here, Gail. We'll see you in a TikTok invasion. See ya. All right, Eliezer, what's happening, brother?
Hey,
who's your question for? I see you call yourself Easy. Is that some sort of like gangster alter ego you've got going on there?
It's easier to say.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Who's your question for, and what's your question?
Yeah, first off, good debate, guys. My question's for Brandon. So, Brandon, are people born gay?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Are you saying that because they are born gay, therefore it is moral?
No, I'm saying that there is no moral harm being done in a same-sex relationship, and therefore it is moral.
So it is moral or it's amoral?
That's a fair question. I think it's amoral. I think there are ways that it can be immoral and ways that it can be moral. Sure.
Okay, what's the threshold that one thing has to meet for it to be moral or amoral?
A non-consensual relationship between somebody who's not two loving adults. I think that would make it immoral.
So is there a specific reason why you choose adults? Like, because if I heard correctly, the two criteria that one has to meet is that it has to be conscious and then consent, correct?
Be very careful with this inquiry because we're on YouTube. They're easy, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't say specific words.
Yeah.
But you tell me if I'm crossing the line.
I was pretty consistent throughout the argument that I believe it's loving, consensual adult relationships between the same sex. The reason I believe that, I'm going to appeal to psychology and all those other good things that say that the human brain develops, and in order to have a sexual relationship between two people, I believe that you need to be on the same developmental level in order to consensually engage with one another. And so if there was a non-consensual same-sex relationship, that's sinful. It's wrong.
Okay, I'll be careful with how I ask this, but if an 8-year-old is born gay and he knows he is gay and there's nothing that can change his mind, and there's a 30-year-old that is also born gay and they both consciously consent, would you say that is morally good or morally bad?
The 8-year-old can't consciously consent.
Why not?
Because brain development is very clear that until you're past the age of 18, some say up to 25, your brain is not fully developed. And so the threshold of consent has been a lot of debate, but it's never been a...
Well, you can't stay on this easy.
Yeah.
You can't stay on this. I'm
Have
sorry,
you got anything
you
else,
can't.
Eliezer?
What was that?
Have you got anything else, bro?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll move it to this real quick and then I'll get off. But for example, you would set a duty in place that even if one is born a certain way, you would still place a certain duty that would kind of restrict certain things, right? Following certain desires.
I don't completely understand what you're saying, but
yeah. For example, like right now, for example, we're far under the birth replacement rate, which Andrew mentioned. So if we wanted to criminalize homosexuality for like a 10 to 30 year period to kind of even those numbers out, you would say that we shouldn't go for that, correct?
yeah, I think that's immoral because it's not something people choose. It's not something people have control over whether or not they do. And so you're forcing people who are born as homosexuals to be criminalized because of how they are naturally born.
Okay. Well, I can't really go through the line of question just to be careful. But what I would say is like it seems like you're setting a threshold between like age specific, even if they're born that way. So it seems like a duty. It's like a duty that we ought to fulfill as a society. So I would say the same thing with being gay and being born gay is that I don't know why you wouldn't just follow a duty instead of following an innate desire, which it sounds like your only justification for why we should allow being LGBTQ in the church is following the desires.
Well, it's because the Bible doesn't condemn it, but yes.
Okay, cool.
All right, cool.
Thanks,
Thanks, Eliezer. I'll see you next week, man.
Yeah.
All right. And we got Siege D here. Siege, what is your question and who is it directed at?
Let's see. I actually have two questions. One for Andrew and then one for Brandon here.
Can I run to the bathroom? You ask Andrew first?
Yep, go for it, man.
So, hey, Andrew.
Go for it, Siege.
Oh, okay, cool. So, hey, Andrew, have you heard about like all the crazy wildfires out over in California at the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. One could say that it's probably due to all the satanic stuff that's going on in Hollywood at the moment.
Hold on a second, dude. What's this got to do with the debate?
Well, it has something to do with kind of like thing that like Brandon has kind of done before, like how he was like doing one of his sermons, and then all of a sudden like lightning struck and then turned off the power. But is that like not about the debate?
Not really, dude. Do you have a question for Andrew regarding what's been mentioned in this debate or not?
No, I don't think so. I was just kind of like wondering if like Brandon, I believe like his ideas were like blasphemous, and that's why a lot of this that the power went out in his church sermon there. But if that's
all right,
against
brother. Yeah, it's not exactly the topic, but I do appreciate you tuning in today. Thanks, man.
Hey, CHD.
Okay.
CHD.
What's up?
We love you.
We love you.
We love you.
All right, bye.
All right, see you, dude. What a way to sign off, Andrew. Why do people think you're not a nice guy when you just
Andrew, that was so
spreading all this love?
pastoral. That was so pastoral.
I have no idea why. No, yeah.
All right, we've got Krisky Pickle Master here. This could be an Andrew hater. What is your question? Who's your question?
It looks like an Andrew hater.
Oh, that hurts my feelings. I love you, Andrew.
I'm kidding.
Go ahead. Today.
Yeah, so my question, I'm not like an Andrew hater. I'm actually the opposite. I was originally going to pose a question for Brandon, but I have to pose one for Andrew. So from my understanding, the Orthodox view is basically that, and it like said in the debate, sin is an illness. It's something that everybody suffers with. But specifically, you were talking about the whistleblower that had basically talked about how conversion therapy was actually having some success. But I was also wondering if it would have been a good idea to bring up and I think you brought this up, it might have been the debate prep stream a couple of days ago, but the CIA, if I understand correctly, they declassified documents that showed that they were actually able to essentially condition people and brainwash people into having different and I don't know if some
that's correct. They used brain probes, in fact, to do it. I have the various documents on it. I brought it up in debates on this before. One with Mr. Brad Palumbo, who also made the immutable argument, and then I demonstrated that this is not actually correct. But in this case, me and Mr. Robertson didn't really have to go rounds on it because he accepted that sexuality can be very fluid in that sense.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Oh, and this is just in between. Could you possibly like DM me those studies on like X or something like that, just so I have them as reference? Okay,
yeah.
Awesome.
Just send me a DM asking for it. Just and you know what? If I don't respond or I say I'll get to it soon, don't hesitate to like send me a reminder. I forget shit all the time. I get a lot of DMs.
Oh yeah, no, it's the same. It's the same with me. I mean, I don't get a lot of DMs. I'm not cool like that, but.
I wasn't saying it as a brag. I was just letting you know.
Yeah, no. I'm totally messing with you.
Andrew left me on scene this week as well. I was like,
yeah. And so that brings up that actually brings up my second thing with it. So now when you say conversion therapy, is the whistleblower specifically referring to like electroconversion therapy, or is it behavioral conversion therapy? Behavioral. Okay. So that's one thing, because I remember I was on a TikTok debate panel, preparing for the TikTok invasion course. And this lady was saying that you advocate for electroconversion therapy, which I just thought was the most ridiculous thing ever. But I thought that I would just at the very least clarify it, that you mean behavioral, not...
Nobody gets to learn more lore that's not true about me on the internet than me. So, I always enjoy my own lore. The stuff that's not true is fantastic, and there's a lot of it, and it's kind of a fun read. So, but yeah, I've never advocated for that. That would be an absurdity, and likely somewhat. It could possibly be somewhat akin to human torture, I would even say. But that's not to say that there cannot be therapeutics which are non-damaging, which could be helpful. But conversion therapy, almost since its inception, because it was starting to have progress, has been viciously attacked by rights advocacy groups on the LGBTQ side. That is not a thing which can even be argued. Since inception, essentially, these therapeutics have been ruthlessly attacked as not working, though nobody will ever do longitudinal studies on them for a reason. So.
Oh, of course. And then, so my third question is not really in reference, like it is in reference to the debate, but I was wondering if Andrew, you would possibly be willing to do some sort of, not a collaboration, but basically I'd like to do either a debate or just interview or something like that along these lines.
Yeah, dude, you can DM me. I go on. No, there's no creator too small whose channel I won't go on. Just give me the grace of knowing that I have a super packed schedule, and it will happen, but it may not be for like months, but it will happen, right? We get everybody on at some point. So,
and I'd actually
very upset because I'm like, maybe in 3 months, but they're like they get mad. Like this debate, this one, I think we had planned months in advance. So just so you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's where that's all at, man.
Yeah, well, I prefer it that way too, because I'd like to, if I am going to do an interview, of somebody who is, I would consider a professional stature such as yourself, I'd like some prep time to basically get good, authentic, deep-rooted questions to ask.
Sure.
All right,
man. Sounds good. Thank you.
You guys will organize that in your own time, which will be great.
Yeah.
So, Chrissy Picklemaster, thank you very much for joining us today, brother.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you guys for letting me on.
All right, see you, dude. So, Andrew, you really thought that he looked like I thought he looked like a crucibilly, like, you know what I mean? I thought that he looked like a head thumping.
I am not going to take any
to...
of the besmirching of the great and wondrous Crucible crew from a dirty, degenerate Australian who lost the emu war. I'm not doing it. If you can't even beat up a large bird, we're just not going to take any guff from you.
To be honest, it's just false history. It's like you just fake news saying that we lost the emu war. But to be honest, we can have that debate another time because it's just historically illiterate. But
now it's a 2v1. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We've just set you up. No, gents, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to stick around for a little bit, guys, and talk about the debate and have a bit of a debrief. But Andrew and Brandon, I'm going to let you guys go. I've seen enough of you both today. Brandon, do you want to start off by once again telling everyone where they can find you, and then Andrew, and then we'll let you guys go.
Yeah, well, again, Jake, thanks so much for hosting this. Andrew, so good to get to chat with you, debate with you. If you want to find out more information, you can go to queerchristian.org. That's where my new book is coming out, where I'm more articulate than I am in a debate, I promise. So check it out.
And Andrew?
My name is Andrew Wilson. I have no books, but my wife has a wonderful one called Occult Feminism, and I steal all of the money that she makes from it to feed my personal gun habit, which I can't help myself, right? It's very greedy of me, and I just kind of smile as I take it, and I'm like, I'm just going to go spend it on ha 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 ha, right? But you can find me on the one and only Crucible, popular debate channel on YouTube, Rumble, other places. I'm a political analyst, satirist, and also I engage in debates all over the world. Lastly, I would just like to include, we would appreciate your patronage to the Crucible.video. Jake can attest that it has some of the best content anywhere on the internet
below as well. Yeah.
And that would be very kind of you. I would like to thank our host, Mr. Rattlesnake, the King of Australia himself, for allowing us to come on and have this conversation. It was very generous of you with your time.
All
so
right,
get over there, crew, and reward him with money.
Well, I'm sticking around, guys. If you guys want to come and join the grift, you can. But yeah, thanks, fellas. And all of your links are all below for anybody who wants to check you guys out. And you're both obviously welcome back on the channel anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Catch you later. All right, gang. What did we think? All right, quick announcement. This is how it's going to work, guys. Every single time we do a debate like this, we're going to announce the next week's debate because I'm determined to get one every single week. Next week, we have got Made by Jim Bob and Eliezer, who was Easy, who was just in the chat just then, are going to be taking on two liberal TikTok streamers. One of them, his name's Evan, and one of them's name is Adam Khan. All right, and they do lots of reactions on TikTok, and they do streaming and debates on TikTok and everything. One of them's been on Jubilee a few times, so it's going to be a 2-on-2, and the topic is going to be Christianity versus progressivism. What is better for society? So I think a lot of people have been wanting to see me get Made by Jim Bob on for a debate for a while, and Eliezer is a guy who's coming up, and he's doing some good things with his channel. So that's what we're going to be doing next week. I appreciate all the patronage tonight, guys. I'm going to read out some of these super chats that I didn't quite get to before, and hopefully I can answer them. But says in 20 to 30 years there will be people like Brandon saying maps should be allowed wed in the church and society. Mark my words. Okay, we won't be going into that. Isaac Hay says how Brandon can say you believe in truth if you think truth is subjective. Your belief is flawed and you can't call yourself faithful. You aren't. I love how like when everyone leaves, I just get back to not being able to read. Beth Mahul for $5 says you can't rely on faith if you don't believe for certain there is a soul. That's true. All right, a little bit TOS there. Justin Henley, appreciate all the super chats tonight. Says you're walking L, progressive and subversive. Be aware there's no logical end to progress/subversion. You could be wrong today, but future is better. King of Pixels for $5 says Brandon believes in religion as much as David Copperfield believes in magic. Brad James, you know Brad. The coined Greek clearly means PDFs. Look, Brad, you were talking all that smack in the comments all day today. You and Zen Loren, and then when it comes down to it, and you have the chance to call in, nothing. You look like you got a microphone there in your photo, maybe a bit of stand-up comedy or something. Not new to the idea of talking. So you should have just come up. You had all these criticisms, but couldn't quite come in there and back them up. But that's all right. Jourdan for $10 says, brother, please respond to my DM so I can follow this biblical scholarship. I'm _Jourdan. Didn't see any DMs. Wrongful Rage for $50 says, no amount of conjecture makes you right. The context you espouse is incorrect upon analysis, Brandon. I think we actually got to that one. Justin Henley for $20 says, since King Jake is not reading my $5 super chats, let's just go with this. If the Bible is fallible, the poem within can be interpreted as fables. Why not just make a non-Christian religion using Disney films and science? Devin the Dude gifted 5 Rattlesnake TV memberships. Hopefully you guys are snapping them up today. Le Radiemule for $10 says, thanks for hosting. I appreciate that you guys appreciate it. Justin Henley says, last one, if the Bible is false but inspired by God, what is the source? You have to confirm the Bible is inspired. What is the source for what is correct in the Bible? Is all truth, like the studies you cite, subjective? All right. Brent Knees for $20 said, would Brandan please stop calling himself a Protestant when he has no grounds in the Protestant beliefs? If I say it's harming me, he should be required to comply. Okay. William just sent $10 and said nothing. What a great man. Annabelle, $5 super sticker. I don't even know what that means. That's like some sort of sticker or something, but I appreciate it. Nathan Slippy for $20 says, ask Brandon, why are you gay? I didn't quite get to that today. Bit inappropriate. I mean, Brandon's a good sport. I think he would have found it funny, but maybe next time. Build a rapport first, hey? Siege D for $10 says, thanks for letting me on, Jake. Sorry, my question was irrelevant, but it's good to know Andrew loves the Siege. Andrew clearly stated that he loves the Siege D. So there you go. All right, Devin the Dude gave $10 for the Rattle Grift. Watch out for those emus. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you supporting the Rattle Grift tonight because this is all demonetized at the moment, obviously, like I said before. So need these palms greased, okay? Jonathan Dinan for $20 says, thanks for having me on. Since I turned 2 questions into 5, you get more money. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your patronage as per usual. So, guys, that was actually interesting. I mean, at the start, we had the poll and we had Brandan at 8% yes, and then it went down to 7% yes. I didn't think that there would honestly be room for that, but, it did manage to happen. So Andrew managed to bring a few people over, which was interesting. That's about it, guys. So don't forget to check in for next week's debate. Big things coming up also with the reality-based podcast, guys. Brent Neese says $10. Long live the emus. Like the emus, honestly. So, yes, big things coming up with the reality-based podcast as well, guys. Keep your eyes peeled because, could be or could not be some interviews coming up. I am going to the ARC conference in like a month in London, Jordan Peterson's Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. So there might be a few interviews there. Might be a few cool things going on. Going to be traveling a bit of America. I leave on Saturday. Going to be in America for a few weeks. Going to go visit Andrew in Michigan and everything. So should be a lot of fun. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for joining me today. Another very successful debate on Rattlesnake TV. Appreciate you all. And until next time, Jake, this is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.